Welcome to Mr. Nightbleed. Tonight, in 7 haunted graveyard horror stories from real life, we step through the rusted gates of cemeteries where names are carved in stone. Flowers wither overnight, and the earth itself remembers what we try to forget. These are chilling accounts of bells that toll without wind, whispers leaking from cracked mausoleums, and footsteps echoing across gravel paths when you know you are utterly alone. This is a new channel, and my goal this month is to reach 3,000 subscribers. Almost 90% of viewers watch and leave without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Subscribe now. Before we begin, share in the comments where you're watching from and what hour of the night it is for you. And if there is a cemetery in your town that unsettles you, type its name. Because once you step past the gates of these haunted resting grounds, not everything allows you to leave. Kill the lights. Silence the world. Take a slow breath, and let us begin. I never planned on writing this down, but the other night I woke up at 3:07 a.m. with my heart pounding and the taste of winter air in my mouth, the kind you get from standing too long near the cemetery gates on Archer Avenue, and I knew I had to tell someone. I'm not posting for attention. I'm posting because I've run out of ways to convince myself it was stress or headlights or a trick of the cold. My friend Louise says I should forget it and move on. My sister Nora says I need sleep. But every time I turn off the lights, I hear the soft click of fingernails on glass, no louder than a moth, like someone tapping from the outside. If you live anywhere near the southwest edge of Chicago, you probably already know the name people use. I never said it out loud until this started. I still don't like saying it now. It began on a weeknight in late February, the kind of wet cold that sticks to your jeans and turns your breath into a steady ribbon. I bartend 2 nights a week at a place in Bridgeport that tries to be both a sports bar and a lunch spot. We get union guys, nurses, the occasional cop, and every few hours someone brings up old local stories. Most of the time they're about crimes from the 80s or Ballpark Frank, the guy who used to eat 9 hot dogs on his break. People laugh. That night the TV above the bar was playing a documentary with closed captions about Chicago hauntings. The customers weren't really watching, but between pours I kept catching pieces of the text moving across the bottom of the screen. White dress, hitchhiker, Archer Avenue, vanishes near the gates. I didn't look at it too long. The manager, Dan, turned the volume up during a commercial and said he'd driven that stretch 100 times and never seen a thing. He was joking when he said it, but he made a sign of the cross anyway. Around 10, my sister Nora texted that her car battery had died at her friend's apartment in Clearing. She asked if I could drop off the jump starter I keep in my trunk. I said of course. We've got each other's spare keys and we trade favors. She's a teacher. She grades papers on my couch when my place is quiet. I closed up at midnight, counted the drawer, and left the bar to the sound of the ice machine heaving in the back. I could see my breath in the lot. The air had that raw feeling like you get right before a snow that never quite arrives. I called Luis, because he's the kind of friend who stays on the line when you're driving late, and he had just gotten off his shift at the plant. He said he'd ride with me to Nora's and then we could hit Maxwell Street for a Polish if the stand was open. We met at the corner by his building. He got into my passenger seat with a half-finished coffee and gloves that didn't match. He always forgets a glove somewhere and ends up with one knit and one leather. We kept the windows cracked for the stale bar smell and headed toward Clearing, but the navigation app suggested cutting down Archer to avoid a lane closure on Cicero. I didn't think about it until the sign for justice flashed by the windshield in that sodium orange light and the road, leveled out to that straight run people always talk about. I don't know if I want to do Archer, Luis said. He was laughing, but he straightened his posture like a kid in the back seat when a cop car merges. He'd seen the documentary too. Everyone has seen some version. It's faster, I said. I thumbed the defroster button even though the glass wasn't fogged. Habit. The night looked like it had been erased and redrawn in hard pencil. The streetlights made islands of light on the asphalt, and in between them was that particular Chicago winter darkness that tastes like rust. A light rain stung the windshield. Every time the wipers passed, the halos around the lamps would smear and then snap back sharp. We passed a bowling alley, a nail salon with a sign off, a hardware store with a dusty snowblower in the window like a museum piece. There was no traffic. It felt like the 3 of us out there, me, Luis, and the car. About a mile before the cemetery, something changed inside the cabin. It wasn't a smell or a draft. It was temperature first. My hands were warm on the wheel and then they weren't. It was like the air inside the car dropped 10 degrees without the heater changing. The digital readout said 72, but my breath came out in a thin veil anyway. Luis rubbed his hands together and tucked them into his armpits. He checked the vents. "Do you feel that?" I was about to say maybe the thermostat was off, when we both heard a small sound from the back seat. Not a thump or a rattle, more like a careful settling, like someone shifting their weight to get comfortable. Luis turned and peered into the back. There were a few flattened cardboard boxes and the jump starter. My winter hat, a stray pen on the floor, nothing else. He sat forward again and shook his head. "You need to clean this out. There's a brick building near the cemetery that has a painted sign from the 1950s. If you know it, you know it. I always use it like a mile marker. When it slid into view, something in me went calm the way you feel calm, just before you admit you're in trouble. I checked the rear view for headlights. There were none. I checked my speed. I was under the limit and didn't remember letting my foot off the gas. We reached the stretch with the fence and the gate, black iron that always looks damp even in dry weather. The stone pillars are clean now, but in the old photos there are smudges and what people claim are prints. I kept my eyes on the white line, but I could feel the iron to my right like a magnet. My left hand tightened on the wheel. My right hand should have been in my lap, but it wasn't. I realized I'd lifted it and placed it palm up over the center console, as if I were offering it. Not like me. Not like me at all. Luis was the first to say it. "Don't stop." "I'm not," I said, but my foot was lighter than it should have been. We were gliding. The wipers squeaked once and went silent. He said it again, louder. "Don't stop." I had a thought at the exact wrong time. I thought about the bar and how Dan had tapped the side of his glass near midnight earlier and said, "She's never going to show up for me." Smirking, like daring the sky to crack. Everyone laughed then. Someone knocked on the wood of the bar for luck. I didn't. I was wiping the taps. We passed the gate. It was quick. That's how I know I'm not embellishing this. It wasn't slow and melodramatic with a woman appearing in the road. It was a quick movement like any pedestrian crossing against the light. The edge of a white dress catching my headlight, the shape of an arm lifting, a face maybe turned away, hair damp against the cheek. And then a weight, definite and undeniable, like a person had just settled into the back seat, careful and light so as not to disturb anything. The car's suspension gave the tiniest dip. It wasn't a trick of nerves. I felt the chassis move. The scent of wet leaves, the way your jacket smells if you kneel at a grave. My rearview mirror showed nothing but dark glass and my own eyes too large. I don't remember making the decision, but my foot pressed harder and we accelerated. The road after the gate has a dip. We hit it and the sound in the cabin changed, like the air had thickened. I know because the music app on my phone cut out and came back without me touching anything, like it had driven through a tunnel. Luis had one hand on the grab handle above the door and the other clamped on the coffee. He was whispering a prayer in Spanish, the one his abuela taught him for protection when they rode the bus as kids. His breath was fast and smoke thin. A soft voice from the back seat said, "Could you take me home?" It was not a threat. It wasn't theatrical. It was the exact voice a tired person uses when they don't want to be a burden. Every hair on my arms rose under my jacket. I should say now that I've done the research since that night and I know what people report. The white dress, the cold Archer Avenue, the request for a ride. At the time, I wasn't thinking folklore or history. I was thinking about how my own voice might sound if I had to answer and didn't want it to crack. "Where do you live?" I said. The words came out steady. I don't know how. There was a pause like she was remembering. "I live close," she said. "I don't want to be late. My mother will worry." Louis shook his head without turning around. He mouthed the word no. "What's your address?" I said because I couldn't think of a different question and it was safer than silence. "On South Dammon," she said, and then she said a number that I knew didn't exist anymore, because a supermarket sits there now. I used to buy groceries there when I first moved back to the city. She said it like she'd practiced it for a door guy who might not let her in, like she wanted to have it ready on her tongue. We drove another half-mile. The temperature inside the car had steadied at cold. The heat on the dashboard was full, but it felt like standing next to a space heater in a warehouse. You get a warm patch on your knees and your ears still ache. I could see the edge of a bus stop shelter appear and vanish in the passenger window like a film edit. Luis put his coffee in the cup holder without looking. and the cardboard made a faint skidding sound like a little skate on the plastic. He whispered, "Don't look back." "I'm taking you home," I said, "because people always say they're just trying to help." "There will be dancing," she said softly. Her tone didn't change, but you could hear the smile behind it. "I don't want to be late." "I know the block where the old dance hall used to be. My mom told me stories about her mom's cousin going there in the 1930s, putting on a dress they weren't supposed to have, giggling behind gloved fingers, slipping out the back door before anyone could say no. When the ghost hunters talk about this, they make it romantic, like a black and white prom. But the voice in my car wasn't a prom. It was a regular Thursday night when someone had saved their tip money and ironed a dress in a kitchen that smelled like cabbage. It was the kind of night that turns a corner of your life you didn't know was a corner until you've passed it. I took the next right without signaling. The turn signal ticked anyway, late and slow, the sound suddenly loud. We bumped over a seam in the asphalt. I could feel sweat between my shoulder blades even though I was freezing. On the corner, a closed bakery had a poster for Patsky still taped in the window from before Lent. The picture's sugar looked like salt under the streetlight. A police SUV rolled through the intersection opposite us and kept going without a glance. The radio on their dash made that scratchy sound like someone crumpling a candy wrapper. "Almost there," I said. It felt like the line you say to a child in the backseat to keep them calm. It felt like the line you say to yourself when your steering wheel trembles and you don't know if it's the road or the tires or your hands. "Almost there." "Thank you," she said. That was the first time the rhythm inside the car relaxed. I could feel it like you notice a song slacking into a bridge. The pressure in my ears eased. My rearview mirror showed the faintest pale smear on the passenger side back window, like someone had breathed lightly and traced a fingertip through the fog. 3 lines curved. It could have been the faded smear from weeks ago when Nora's kids rode in my back seat with their gloves off and made hearts on the glass. It could have been anything. I told myself it was anything. I took the long way toward Damen, away from the supermarket, because her address didn't exist anymore, and I didn't know what would happen if I drove her to a set of automatic doors and fluorescent lights. I figured if a cop stopped us, I'd just say we got turned around. I've said that before, even when I wasn't turned around. You say it with a tired smile and it softens them. We passed a gas station with all the lights off except the pump screen. It glowed that pale blue that makes your teeth look gray. A man in a hoodie was cleaning the slush with a squeegee. He watched us float by like we were on a conveyor. We passed a bus that had no passengers and a driver staring straight ahead like at a sermon. The digital route number blinked in and out. We passed a house wrapped in plastic sheeting on the porch, and a woman smoking with calf-length socks and a pink bonnet, her smoke rising straight up because the wind had stopped entirely. The world had that silent feeling like when a storm has pulled its breath. "Do you believe in God?" she asked. The question wasn't demanding. The way she said it sounded like she already knew my answer. "I think so," I said. It felt like a lie and also not a lie. "My father doesn't like when I'm out late," she said. "He thinks God will punish. But I like the music. I like to move. I like when the boys are kind and the girls are laughing. I think God likes when we move. I think he made us to move." Louis squeezed his eyes shut. He opened them and stared straight ahead. "Please," he whispered. "Please, please." We reached a stretch where the city goes from old bungalows to the low industrial buildings that bleed off heat all night. The steam from their vents rolled and thinned. A billboard for a law firm stood at an angle like a scold. I turned in a slow loop because I had no destination that made sense and I didn't know how to end this in a clean square. I thought about pulling up to the 10th District Station and just stopping. I imagined the officers walking out, hands on belts, the sort of patience they have with drunks. I imagined explaining, "I didn't do it. I didn't want to hand her off like lost property." "Is this close?" I asked. "Yes," she said, and then added, "I'm sorry, my hands are cold." The apology sounded fresh and repeated at the same time, like something you say every winter to strangers. I realized then that my right hand was still palm up over the center console. My fingers were white at the knuckles. It hurt. I lowered it into my lap and the pain ebbed in slow little pulses. I didn't want to see if frost had formed on my skin. I didn't want to give it that storybook detail. I looked ahead, past the faint reflection of my own face in the windshield, and aimed for the kind of corner that feels like an ending. Quiet. A stop sign, a house with a porch light. As I eased to a stop, The passenger window, the back one, fogged from the inside and then unfogged as if someone had wiped it clean with a sleeve. 3 letters appeared in the clearing that were not quite letters. More like impressions the brain converts because it wants to. They were drawn slowly enough that each line left a crisp edge, M.A., a vertical smear as if starting an R and stopping. I said her name out loud for the first time and hated myself for the drum beat it put in the car. The letters faded so quickly you could convince yourself they were not there. "Thank you," she said again, closer this time. Not at my ear, more like the voice had moved forward in the car. Bent in a little, the way a passenger does before they open the door to leave. Every part of my skin understood that movement. "You're welcome," I said. I waited for the door latch, that little mechanical click. It didn't come. The light on the ceiling didn't flicker. A dog on the second-floor porch across the street stood and put its front paws on the rail. It had been asleep seconds before. It didn't bark. It looked past me, above me, toward something I couldn't see. The temperature in the car rose a fraction. My fingers ached less. The sense of someone leaning in receded like a tide. I wasn't brave enough to turn and confirm. I watched the dog. It kept its paws on the rail long enough that its owner came out and snapped a finger at it. The man was in pajama pants and a heavy coat and bare feet. He didn't look down at the sidewalk. He kept his gaze at that same point above my car and squinted like reading a sign in bad light. Then he shook his head once hard, like a man shaking off a thought he doesn't want, and tugged the dog inside. The door closed with a clack you could hear even across the street. I put the car back in drive. On impulse, I checked the back seat. The cardboard boxes were as they had been. The jump starter had slid half an inch toward the center as if moved by a careful shoe. My winter hat had flipped open so the inside seam showed. There was a small oval impressed on the seat like someone had rested a clutch purse there and lifted it. I pulled away from the curb and drove in a daze to Nora's friend's apartment. She came down with her keys and a flashlight and laughed at the sight of both of us, saying we looked like we'd been stood up. The laugh died when she saw our faces. We jumped her battery. Louise held the light. My hands shook when I connected the clamps, and I told Nora it was because I hadn't eaten. She tried to press me to come up for tea. I said no, I had to be back for a morning shift at the bar. It was not true. On the way home, we didn't talk about it until we passed a billboard for a funeral home, and both, at the exact same time, reached out to lower the radio volume that wasn't even on. Louise said, "We didn't stop at the gate." "I know," I said. "Then why do I feel like we did?" "I don't know," I said. When I dropped him off, he put the coffee cup in my bin and then reached back into the car like he had left something in the back seat. He dragged his fingertips lightly across the upholstery. He didn't like what he felt. I could tell because he pulled his hand back and rubbed his thumb and forefinger together the way you do when you've touched cold glass. "Don't tell Dan about this," he said. "He'll make jokes." I didn't plan to tell anyone. I went home and sat in my kitchen with the lights off for a long time. The fridge hummed and shuddered. The clock over the stove blinked 12 young because the power had flickered weeks ago and I never fixed it. I slept for 2 hours and dreamed the sound of a dress hem brushing a stair. In the morning, the car smelled faintly of pond water. I opened all 4 doors and let the air move through. My neighbor Hank, a retired firefighter, waved at me as he salted his front step. He has big hands and a permanent squint from smoke and sun. He nodded toward my car and said, "Got a foggy window problem?" "I think I left the heat off," I said. He grunted. "You hear they cleaned the bars again?" He said I didn't ask what bars, I knew. I stared past him into the middle distance the way you do when you're pretending to think of a grocery list. He kept talking. He said kids still go out there and make a mess, and the groundskeepers have to scrub the gates because people think it's cute to stick gum there like it's a wall of wishes. I said I hadn't heard. Then he told me he used to drive Archer when he was young and dumb, and he saw something white once in a snow squall and almost put the truck in a ditch. He laughed then, but it was a quiet, respectful laugh, nothing like the barroom jokes. "Hank is not a man you make fun of." He clapped me on the shoulder and went inside. For 2 days, nothing obvious happened. I kept busy. I drank water. I didn't take Archer. Then on Saturday night, as I was taking out the trash at closing, Dan said, "Hey, did you read this?" He held up his phone. He had a local news article open. A car wreck on Archer at about 2 in the morning. Driver swears he saw a girl step out of nowhere in a white dress. He swerved and hit the median. He was okay. The passenger had a broken wrist. The cops chalked it up to black ice. The photo in the article showed the fence in the background. The iron bars looking the way they always look in pictures, like painted bone. Dan chuckled and said, "People will blame anything but themselves." I stared at the photo so long my eyes watered. Nora came in after her shift at the school on Monday to grade spelling tests at the corner of the bar. She jostled her tote and a ribbon of paper from our register spool fell out. She picked it up and read it without thinking. "The way you read anything in your hands." She frowned. "This is weird," she said and slid it to me. Someone had typed on it, not printed, but used the keys like a typewriter. At the top, the date and time were correct, because the register stamps it. Under that, in shaky, careful letters, someone had typed, "Can you take me home?" No question mark, no please, just the exact same cadence as the voice in the car. I told myself some drunk had pressed the keys and then tore the strip, and we hadn't noticed until now. I told myself that and then noticed the timestamp, 12:13 a.m., the night we drove Archer. I didn't show it to Luis. I didn't want to put that weight on him. I tried to be normal. I really did. I went to work. I paid my gas bill. I watched a video about fixing a leaky faucet and didn't fix it. I would have kept going like that if nothing else happened. But I woke one night sometime after 3 with a crystalline thought. I hadn't locked my car. It was the kind of thought you'd have any night, and I've had it before and gone outside in my socks like an idiot. I grabbed my keys and stepped out onto the small back stair that leads to the lot behind my building. The air had that brittle bell-like ring that feels like it could shatter if you clap. I clicked the key fob and heard the car respond with a polite chirp and the soft clunk of the locks dropping. Before the chirp faded, I heard a second sound from the driver's side window, no louder than a fingertip tapping twice. I stood on the stairs longer than made sense. I told myself it was a drop of ice sliding. The next morning, in the thin dirt on the bottom edge of the glass, I found 3 faint tracks like you might get if you drag a fingernail lightly. I wiped them with my sleeve, and the sleeve came away damp and smelling like old flowers. I stopped using the back seat unless I had to. A week later, Luis convinced me to meet him and his cousin for tacos after their late shift. We ate standing up in a little place that keeps the door propped and the grill going until 2. Luis told the cousin the story, but he took the corners off, made it sound like we had just spooked ourselves. The cousin said the usual things about urban legends and that girl in the white dress. He said his friend had once seen a woman run barefoot across the street near the gate. Then he said something that stuck to me. "It's not the first time someone asked you for a ride, right?" People ask for rides all the time. That's the problem with being a decent person. You get asked. He meant it to be a joke, but it lodged in me like a splinter. The next night, my phone woke me at 2:11 with a call from an unknown number. I don't answer those, but I answered. Static at first, like an old record, then a small hiccup of a voice like someone trying to figure out how to talk through a sleeve. "Could you take me home?" I said hello 3 times and then, "Who is this?" The line went dead. I checked the call log and it was blank. No missed calls. My apartment smelled like wet wool. I lay back down and told myself it was a dream I'd inserted into my memory like glue into a crack. That's a thing we do, I've read. The brain loves a pattern. I held out another week and then, against the basic wisdom you'd give any stranger on the internet, I drove Archer again. I told myself I was doing a controlled exposure, like people who are afraid of elevators and ride 1 floor at a time until their heart slows. I left the bar at 1 a.m. and turned onto the quiet street and whispered to no one that this was stupid and fine at the same time. I passed the stone pillars. I didn't see a dress. I didn't hear a wait. I drove past clean. The relief felt like someone had taken a band off my chest. I started to laugh at myself, and then, 2 blocks later, the check engine light clicked on with a polite ping and the power steering went heavy. I eased to the curb and turned on my hazards. They ticked with that metronome sound that makes you too aware of time. The neighborhood there is a mix. A dark park, a funeral home, houses with little lions on the steps. It was very quiet. I popped the hood, stood under the streetlight, and stared at hoses like a person before a museum painting that means something only if someone explains it. My breath made a steady spool in front of me. I called roadside assistance and they put me on hold, cheery music low in my ear. I heard the kind of shoe I've only seen in old photos coming toward me on the sidewalk. Small heel, not a spike, more like a practical dress shoe. The sound was not loud. It was precise. I stayed looking at my engine. The footsteps stopped at the edge of my passenger door. A car passed 2 blocks away and I saw the heel's shadow flick for a moment across the white of my fender. A cat watcher's movement. I didn't turn. Could you take me home? The voice came from where the shadow would be, just outside the passenger door. It was as soft as it had been in my car that first night. Closer, but not inside yet. And it carried the tiniest tremor of embarrassment, the way a person sounds when they've had to ask twice and don't want you to feel bad. I can't right now, I said. My mouth was dry. My car is broken. I don't want to be late, she said. They said we would be careful. They said they would be gentlemen. I believe you, I said. I stared at the dipstick as if it contained writing. The hazard lights ticked. Tick, tick. I could see in the corner of my eye a small profile like the edge of a face leaning toward the window. No breath fogged the glass. A patrol car rolled slow toward the intersection and paused like they were sniffing out something more interesting than a stalled sedan. I raised my hand without turning my head to show I was okay. The car idled. The officer in the passenger seat leaned out a crack and said, "You good?" The voice outside my door went quiet in an instant, the way a whisper stops when a light turns on. I nodded to the cruiser. "I'm okay," I said. "Help is coming." The officer studied me a heartbeat longer than felt normal, then gave me a 2-finger salute and the car glided away. When I lowered my hand, the voice was back and softer. "I'm cold," she said. "I'm sorry." I unlocked the passenger door and opened it halfway. This is the part I can't explain to myself. By every sensible measure, I should not have done it. But it felt ruder not to. Like leaving someone outside your apartment building in the rain. The seat was empty. The emptiness had shape. The interior light didn't come on. Or it came on a shade too dim, the way a bulb looks right before it dies. I pushed the door wider and the cold walked in. And I do mean walked. The air moved as if someone had passed a figure between the doorframe and my chest. Then it settled in the passenger seat. The cushion gave the smallest sigh. The scent of damp leaves returned. "Thank you," she said. I sat back behind the wheel. I didn't touch the hood again. I didn't look at the passenger seat because I knew I couldn't take whatever I would see or not see. I texted Luis one word, "Here." He responded, "On my way." The hazard lights ticked. My phone's battery icon glowed red like an ember. From the passenger side, the faintest brush of fabric, hands being folded in a lap. A girl straightening the seam of a dress. "You don't have to take me all the way," she said. "Just as far as the dance. They know me there. They've seen me." I watched a man across the street scrape ice off his windshield with a credit card because he'd lost his scraper. He swore softly at the card like apologizing to it. He never looked our way once. Another car drove by, its tires whispering on the wet, the driver peering forward at nothing. I listened the way you listen for a kettle that might boil over. The roadside assistance line clicked and a recorded voice told me a truck would arrive in 30 minutes. I knew in my bones they wouldn't find anything wrong when they got here. I accepted that knowledge the way you accept your reflection. "Can I ask you a question?" I said yes. She said, "Are you angry?" It came out before I could pretty it up. People who write about these things often make the dead wise or wrathful, because those are big emotions that fill a page. The answer I got didn't fit either. "I am late," she said. That was the whole of it. Tired, hurt by the unfairness of something small turning itself large. I don't want them to be waiting for me. Luis's car slid in behind mine, easy as a boat docking. He jogged up in his mismatched gloves, took one look at my face, glanced at the open passenger door and didn't look inside. He has better instincts than me in some ways. "You okay?" he asked. "My car died," I said. He nodded. He closed the passenger door gently like you would close a sleeping baby's door. The click landed in my chest. The temperature in the cabin lifted a notch and my breath didn't plume the same way. He put his hand on my shoulder and squeezed. "Come sit in my car," he said. "They'll tow it and we'll deal with it tomorrow." We sat in his car with the heater blowing and the windshield fogging along the edges. From there I watched mine idle with its hazards blinking an orange heartbeat. The tow truck came quicker than promised. The driver was a guy in his 30s with a knit hat and a grin tinted by energy drinks. He said, "Happens all the time around here. It's like the road doesn't like certain engines." He laughed after he said it and then apologized to the air, which made me wonder what he said when he was alone. They took my car to a shop I trust. The mechanic, a woman named Asha who fixes things fast and never upsells, called me the next afternoon and said, "I can't find a single thing wrong." I'd drive it to New York right now. She said it kindly, not like a challenge. She told me she cleaned some gunk off a sensor, just to feel like she'd done something. When I picked it up, the radio presets had all shifted one station to the left, like someone had tried to tune in music between frequencies. I put them back without thinking and only realized hours later what I'd changed. You want me to say this ended with a confession or a black and white photo or a ring of burned fingerprints on iron? It didn't. It ended the way most things end, by thinning. The call stopped. The temperature in my car returned to normal. I started to sleep again and only sometimes woke at 3:07 with the taste of cold in my mouth. A month went by, then another. I took Archer once with no trouble. I took it again because I'm not smart. I took it a third time because routines are stubborn, and we go back to the places that scare us to try to drain the fear out. Each time I drove past the gate and felt only the ordinary dread you feel when passing a cemetery at night, which is to say a small pulse of your own mortality and the urge to put the radio on. But the story doesn't let go. You can forget during the day, but then at a red light your eyes drift to the rearview mirror and catch the backseat in the shallow greenish glow of the dash. You notice the faintest oval on the vinyl where a clutch might rest and you tell yourself it's always looked like that. You brush your hand over the seat and your fingertip comes away cool, and you tell yourself the window was cracked. You do your best to be sensible. You say the name under your breath and then you don't for a week. Last Friday, after closing, Dan taped a new laminated sign to the bar that said, "No credit, no tabs, no exceptions." He used too much tape and smoothed it with his palm like a teacher with a poster. The TV was off. The ice machine was quiet. He turned to me and said we should do an Archer run after we mopped like old times. He said we could bring bolts and bolt cutters and take down one of the bars people keep pretending has prints just to shut everyone up. He said it with a grin and he said it looking me in the eye so I would agree. "Another time," I said. "I'm beat." He shrugged and went to count the till. I wiped the bar and thought about the girl who asks for a ride and apologizes for her cold hands and wants to get to a dance that no longer exists. I thought about how the worst thing you can do to a person isn't to hurt them. It's to make them late for something they'd been looking forward to. The smaller the errand, the meaner it is to ruin it. I think about that when I can't sleep. The night I wrote this, I checked my car locks again because I couldn't help it, and the glass was clean and dry and the seat was just a seat. When I turned to go back inside, I saw a woman walking along the far edge of the lot in a pale coat. It was the wrong season for pale coats. She didn't look at me. She crossed under the streetlight and the light caught only the curve of her cheekbone, and the hair pinned at the nape like a style out of a photo album. I wanted to call out and ask if she needed a ride. I didn't. She reached the sidewalk and turned the corner, and the sound of her step was the small, precise sound of a heel made for dancing, softened by weather, patient with time. I unlocked my door and went inside and stood with my ear to the wood like a person listening for a horn. I've written this down because I need to put it somewhere outside my head. Believe me or don't, I don't care. If you drive Archer late, don't go looking for her. But if you feel your car dip as if someone set down the gentlest weight in your backseat, if the temperature reels backward and your breath makes lace and you find your right hand palm up like an offering, without remembering when you moved it, don't mock, don't dare the dark to do its trick. Keep your eyes on the line. Keep your voice level. Ask where home is, even if you know it's not there anymore. And when you pass the gates and the fence looks like painted bone and the dog on the porch stands with its paws on the rail, to watch something you can't see, remember that not every haunting is about rage. Sometimes it's just about someone who hates to be late, who wants to move the way music makes you move, and who needs, for a few minutes, a warm car and a person who will say yes. If you can't bring yourself to say yes, at least don't tell the story with a joke later in a bar with the ice machine heaving in the back. The night hears you. The iron remembers. And once you've heard the soft, careful voice ask from just behind your shoulder, it never really sounds like the wind again. I never planned on writing about this, but the way I've been waking up lately makes it impossible to ignore. I keep finding the imprint of a small hand where my pillow dips like a child pressed their palm there while I was sleeping. It isn't shaped by wrinkles or the way I move around. It's 5 distinct dents, the fingers splayed, and they stay visible for a few minutes after I sit up, like the bed clings to the memory. I told myself it was a weird fabric pattern or the way the foam springs back. Then last Thursday when I turned over, there was the sound of laughter right behind my ear. A quick, bright little giggle, the kind you hear in a playground when someone wins a silly game. Except my apartment is on the 4th floor and I live alone. I think it's time to tell the whole thing, because it didn't start in this room. It started in Edinburgh, under a sky that never really turned black. I went there last winter with my friend Elliot, the kind of trip you plan to make a dent in the gloom after the holidays. Flights were cheap. We packed for rain and wind and promised to try haggis and maybe do one of those ghost walks you see on YouTube. Elliot is one of those people who laughs at haunted places in the same breath he signs up to go. I'm not jumpy, but I'm not careless either. I have a habit of checking doors twice, then checking again, and I don't sleep with the closet open. That trip I kept thinking about good coffee and old stone. I told myself that if we did anything haunted, it would be for a laugh. On our second day, we did the Royal Mile tourist circuit. We climbed past shops selling tartan and shortbread and tiny bottles of whiskey, moved through a cathedral that smelled like cold stone, and stood at the castle where the wind cut across the esplanade. That night, we hunted down a pub on Candlemaker Row because it was out of the way, and because the bartender's name online made Elliot snicker. The pub was narrow and warm and full of the sound of old voices. The wood along the bar had been touched to a shine. We drank pints we didn't need and listened to two men in flat caps argue about hearts and hibs. Somewhere in there, a woman in a wool coat sat beside us and told the bartender she was doing the late tour. She had a soft tea in her words that I liked right away. She turned, flashed a smile at me that unwound something tense in my shoulders and said, "You two should come along. Clears the head before you sleep." Her name was Maeve, though her accent had more city than Gaelic to it. Elliot kicked me under the bar. "Yes," he said before I could think it through. "We're in." Maeve led the group up the slope beside the pub and into Greyfriars Kirkyard. The gate shrieked when she pulled it and then closed behind us with a clank that sounded bigger than the metal needed to be. It was not really late, but Edinburgh in winter goes dim fast. The sky was the color of a bruise and the city's light leaked over the wall. Snow sat in the hollows between stones like breath you could see. We walked on faint gravel that crunched just enough to make you listen, and the wind moved around our ears in little hands. Maeve raised a lantern for effect, not because she needed it. She told stories in a voice pitched to Carrie, and it worked. She started with dogs and loyalty, the famous tale of Greyfriars Bobby, and the group relaxed into the rhythm of listening. The graves leaned, as if they were tired of standing. Some had skulls carved into them that made me smile because they felt like cartoon warnings from another century. Others had angels whose faces had been eaten away by weather to blankness. The city surrounded us. You could see tenements over the wall and hear buses from the road beyond. I kept thinking about how the living and the dead had been neighbors here for hundreds of years. It felt less like a haunted place and more like a complicated, slightly crowded meeting room where everyone minds their own business. When we reached the section called the Covenanters' Prison, Maeve paused. The gate to that part was locked, rusted chain looped through iron. Her lantern lit a sign about hours and respect. There was a heaviness in the air that I only noticed because it changed, like the way a room feels when a door opens somewhere else. "People come for the Black Mausoleum," she said quietly, and the way she said it made our tight little group lean closer. "They come for the poltergeist. But the worst stories aren't about him. The worst are about the children." Someone toward the back laughed in the way you do at a lecture to make it less intense. Maeve didn't smile. She lifted the lantern a little and let the glow pain across the black metal door set in stone. "The mausoleum is the mausoleum of Sir George Mackenzie. History gives him his titles. Locals give him other names. We've had bruises and scratches and fainting. It's worse in the summer when you're warm and your blood's near the surface. But listen, the ones that stick with me are the ones who hear laughing. You'll be walking and it'll be quiet, and then you'll hear a child, 2 children, maybe more. Just laughter. A game you can almost make out. If you reach down without thinking, like you would for a niece or a kid on a busy street, you might feel a hand take yours. Small, trusting, cold as a penny. It will be there until you look at it. Then it won't be. And if you still feel it when you go home, you've brought something with you." The wind sighed against the wall as if that were a cue. My scalp tightened. Elliot shifted beside me, his bravado shrinking like a sweater in hot water. He said way too loudly, "So they follow people home now. International hauntings." Maeve didn't take the bait. "No one here tonight is in any danger. We respect the place. We keep to the paths. If you see anything, you keep it to yourself unless it's an emergency." If you feel something, take a breath. Do not run. The quickest way out is the same way you came in. We walked on deeper into the churchyard along a path between numbered layers. I noticed things I wouldn't have if I'd been alone. Little details your brain sucks in when you're trying not to be afraid. The way a tomb had a tiny iron door with a slot like a letterbox. The way tree roots had folded around stone as if they were tucking a blanket. The smell of cold earth mixed with something faintly sweet and old, as if 100 bouquets had left a memory in the dirt. Our group got quieter. Footsteps started to sync up. Every whisper sounded like a hiss. I started to hear something. It had been there, I think, for a minute before I acknowledged it. It hid in the noise of our steps and the cars in the distance and the occasional creak. It was like a high note from a kettle in another room. The part of a radio song that you only notice when it repeats. Then it pulled into focus as we slowed for a corner, and I realized it was the edges of laughter, quick silver little bursts. It felt harmless on the surface. It made the hairs on my arm stand up anyway. Elliot nudged me, eyes bright in the lantern light. "You hear that?" he whispered without question. He had his phone in his pocket, but he didn't take it out. I think we both knew blocking the dark with a bright screen would be worse. Maeve doesn't make a show of things. But she paused at the corner and lifted the lantern higher and said, "Mind where you put your hands." She smiled when she said it, like a teacher easing a class into something difficult. The corner opened into a rectangular space with a long row of stones on one side and a wall on the other. At the far end against the wall was a low building, a kind of buttress thing with ironwork. The light skimmed off its curves and made it look oiled. The air was colder there, my breath thicker. The laughter nudged at my ears again. I couldn't tell where it came from. It wasn't echoing like computer speakers. It was more like a sound that didn't need to travel to get to you. The group did the usual half-joke shuffling people do when they want to be brave without walking first. Then something small slid against my palm. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't like a hand grabbed me. It was the exact weight of a child's hand arriving in yours when you're crossing a busy street, and they need an anchor. A little temperature shock. Cold spreading along the line where we touched. I didn't move my eyes from Maeve's lantern because I was afraid if I looked down I'd see nothing, and break something in myself I wouldn't know how to fix. The hand felt older than the size suggested. I know that sounds strange. I mean, it had a way of being there that felt practiced and tired, like it had tried this walk before with other people who didn't look down. I said, very quietly because my mouth felt too big for my voice, "Elliot." He leaned his shoulder against mine the way he does when we're in a crowd. "Yeah. Do you see a kid?" "What?" "Don't look," I said, which made him keep his gaze straight ahead, jaw working. "Just tell me if you feel anything." He took a breath. I felt his hand search for mine on my left side, the free one, and squeeze it. He held on like that for a few seconds. His hand is big and warm even when he's cold. The hand in my other palm tightened as if to keep score. The laughter was closer now, and I realized there were two kinds. A brighter sound and a softer one that wheezed on the tail end. I wanted to say something to Maeve, but her lantern had moved to the left, and I understood the unspoken rule of the moment. Don't break the thread. I tried a silly thing. I counted in my head, 1 to 5, the way you do with kids when you cross. At 3, the small hand squeezed. At 5, it let go. The weight vanished so completely I gasped, like I'd been underwater and didn't realize it until air burned my throat. I looked anyway because I'm not made of stone, and there was nothing beside me. There was the tomb, the ironwork, Elliot, the group, the lantern light, the wall, a little depression in the thin layer of frost on the path, 3 ovals in a rough triangle. It could have been anything. Me moving poorly, wind, a trick, except I hadn't moved. We finished the tour with the polite applause people give to things that deserve more but make them uncomfortable. Maeve walked us back to the gate, clicked it closed behind the last of us, and stood with the polite distance you keep with strangers at night. Elliot was chatty all the way down the hill, adrenaline buzzing. He said he was going to sleep like a rock. He said he was going to make a TikTok about how ghost children abroad have better manners than the teenagers back home. I said I needed to brush my teeth for longer than usual. It was the kind of dumb joke that releases a knot between people. We went into the pub for a whiskey we didn't need. We ended up talking to the bartender about football we didn't understand. By the time we got back to our rental, the whole thing had the glow of a story you tell in the morning to make the day interesting. I slept, but it wasn't clean. I dreamed about walking along a wall that went on for miles. In the dream, The sky looked exactly like it had over the churchyard, a light that never quite gave you what you needed. I felt the small hand again, but I was frustrated, because every time I tried to see the face that matched it, the world moved me like a belt, transferring me forward on a loop. I woke twice with a sharp inhale, the way you do after running for a bus you didn't catch. When I woke for real, Elliot was already up. He had that bleary, overslept face people get when their body took sleep without asking. He had toast in his hand and was talking about a farmer's market. I stripped the bed to shake out the sheets because the duvet bunched, and I hate lumps. That's when I saw the first handprint. It wasn't burned in. It wasn't a stain. It was a pattern in the fabric, a rumpling the shape of a small palm with splayed fingers. It sat in the middle of the bottom sheet where my hip had been. I pressed my hand against it to smooth it, and my hand looked big and adult and completely wrong on top of it. I laughed to break the quiet in my head and called to Elliot in a voice that didn't wear my panic. He came in with his plate, took one look, and like an idiot touched it too. Then he did that thing where you immediately want to rule out the obvious. He checked the shape of the mattress, ran his fingers under the sheet, pressed the bed in a wider circle as if a spring had kinked into a weird pattern. The handprint didn't budge until he stripped the sheet all the way off. When the fabric went slack, it fell apart into wrinkles. Elliot said, "We both need more coffee." He threw the sheet on the chair and smiled in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "You have anxious sleep. Your body is inventing children." We left it at that. It would have taken something stranger to make me press Maeve's number and ask if this was normal. We spent the next day doing all the sober tourist things. We ate pastries with names I couldn't pronounce without apologizing first. We took photos of Ms. Crane's in a graveyard that wasn't haunted. I forgot about the way my sheet had bunched until that night, when I got back in bed and everything in me resisted the idea in a sudden, big way. Elliot joked that he'd switch sides with me in the morning if I wanted. I slept eventually because your body always chooses survival ahead of clarity. When I woke up, there were 3 handprints. They were not side by side. They were scattered, the way children's hands fall on a table when they stop paying attention. One was near the pillow, the thumb angled an odd way. Another lay across the shape of my ribs, fingers spread as if feeling for the caged lift of breath. The last perched near my feet, the fingers short and blunt. They were all in the same slightly darker tone, the pattern in the fabric running a different direction. I didn't call Elliot. I didn't need to have the conversation where I pretend it's nothing, and he pretends I'm right. I folded the sheet as carefully as I could, put it in my suitcase, and changed the bed with the spare I found in the closet. I told myself I'd throw it away. I told myself that in a different room, the pattern would reveal itself as some boring defect. A mistake in the weaving machine, static from the dryer, the kind of thing you could look up if you cared to learn the name for it. We flew home 2 days later. I slept badly on the plane. The noise of the jet dug behind my eyes the way noise does, making everything sound like it had teeth. Home settled around me like a blanket on a couch you know very well. My apartment is laid out so the bedroom is furthest in, away from the street. The radiator tinks in the first cold weeks like a polite cough. I took the Edinburgh sheet out and set it in the hamper to deal with in a sane hour. On the first night, I woke in the hour that feels like falling through water. A sense of wrongness leaned over the bed like someone checking if I was awake. The radiator was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you inventory your body to be sure you still own all of it. I didn't move at first. Then I turned very slowly and checked the dark for shapes that didn't belong. The tiny glow from the power strip made a little geometry out of the dresser. The closet door was shut. My phone had slipped half off the nightstand like it always does because I never learn. My breath fogged the cold a little, and the fog didn't look like breath. It looked like something stroking my face. I told myself the air in winter is full of tricks. I went back to sleep by lying to myself that I was already there. The handprint started on the 3rd morning, not on whatever sheet I'd used the night before, on the Edinburgh one in the hamper. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't moved it. When I tossed laundry in, I could see them through the folds, one on the top layer, one on the sheet beneath hidden until movement revealed it. The same size as before, the same soft splay of fingers. I took the sheet out and laid it flat on the bed. The handprints kept their shape even against the strain of the fabric stretching. I put my hand down next to one and then pulled it back because I didn't know whether they counted that as permission. I did dumb rituals because we all do when we're scared. Salt on the windowsills, a glass of water beside the bed like a grandmother had told me to leave it there. I googled Greyfriars Kirkyard child laughter follow home, and then clicked away because watching shaky phone footage of other people breathing hard in the dark was not going to help. I thought about calling Maeve, who had given us a card with her number on it. I pictured how that conversation would go. "Hi, you don't know me. I was on your tour last week. The children are making themselves comfortable in my laundry basket." The image of her side of that call made me feel unstable, like when you step down and miss a stair your eyes swore was there. I put the card in the drawer instead. A week went by. The handprints got bolder. Sometimes they were wet to the touch, like condensation left from something colder than the room. Sometimes they were dry and rough. Once, the handprint on the pillow was turned in the way you turn your palm when you're about to ask a question. It had the smallest smudge near the base of the thumb that caught at a thread. I didn't sleep long anymore. When I did, I dreamed of the Kirkyard wall again, the way it runs and runs with the city pressing close, and something stays on the other side, matching your pace. Two things escalated everything at once. The first was small. I was in the kitchen making tea because hot water gives you something to do with your hands. The kettle clicked off. The radiator ticked a greeting that made me exhale. As I poured, I heard a quick little knock from the hallway. Waist height, exactly the way a child knocks when they've been told to be polite. I stood there with the kettle in my hand and said, "Just a minute, because reflex is its own god." When I stepped into the hall, there was nothing there besides the light I leave on because the switch is in an inconvenient place. Except that on the wall at that height there were 3 small clean patches where the paint had been touched by cold or heat. I couldn't tell. It looked like the wall had been fingered by frost. The second was bigger. Elliot came over with takeout and borrowed sarcasm. He doesn't like me to be alone when I spiral. He said he'd been waiting for me to bring it up and that we were going to address it like adults. He stripped my bed like a maid with a grievance and marched the Edinburgh sheet to the tub. He soaked it in hot water. He used detergent like his mother used to, the kind that smells like crisp apples when it's lying to you about chemistry. He scrubbed gently because he's not a monster. He wrung it out with determined kindness. Then he ironed it. He ironed a bed sheet on my kitchen table with the focus of someone trying to flatten a memory. We made the bed with it together. It was so smooth I felt guilty breathing near it. We slept with the door to the hall open because that felt safer than closing ourselves in. We woke to morning in that pale way winter has. The sheet looked mostly undisturbed. There was the rough shape of our bodies, the dip where pillows had crushed. Elliot stretched like a cat and then went still, his eyes on the area just below my shoulder. There, pressed into the crisp fabric, was a child's hand again. Just the one this time. It was smaller than the others by a finger's width. The palm was faintly darker, as if it had been wet before it touched the sheet and had nearly dried. The fingers were not equal in pressure. The ring finger on the tiny hand left the deepest impression. Elliot didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, in the slow, careful voice he uses for bad news as a joke, "Right. That's specific." He tried appealing to reason, as if it were a person we could invite to sit at the table and make this stop. He measured my hand. He measured the space between. He made a list of explanations and crossed them out as we tested each one. He put my sheet in a bag and sealed it like evidence. He tried to talk me into going back to Edinburgh so we could confront the problem at its source, which made me laugh so sharply he stopped. We settled on secondary rituals. Bread in the oven, because everyone knows warmth is a prayer. Music at a low volume, something that doesn't pretend to scare things away. We made a playlist a child might like if that child had never learned anything after the 19th century. We agreed not to talk about leaving anything for anyone to take. For a day or two, the apartment softened. The radiator ran steadily. The handprint stayed away. When they returned, they did it in a new way. I woke to laughter again, but this time it was right at my ear, as if the child had cupped their hand around their mouth to tell me a secret. The sound was bright and quick and of this world. It made my chest ache as if you could miss something you didn't remember losing. I turned my head toward the sound and felt the weight on the pillow shift, the way a small person's elbow would make the bed adjust. I didn't open my eyes immediately. I counted again. 1 to 5. On 3, there was the tiniest pressure against my cheek. A tap-tap like a game where you're supposed to guess something you can't see. On 5, I moved. There was no one there. There was the pillow and the dent where my head had been. There was the face of my phone, black. There was the hint of the hall light. There was the shape of a hand on the pillow, the fingers splayed wide. The edge of the palm crisp like someone had pressed the heel of their hand down to steady themselves. I reached up, not to touch but to hover, and a thought moved through me that wasn't mine. It was a feeling more than words, but if it had words, they would have been something like stay. Not a plea, not a demand. Just a child's inconvenient wish, I said, with my voice barely there. I can't take care of you. The radiator ticked softly. The weight on the pillow lifted, as if the child had accepted that rule the way children accept the rules of games. The handprint stayed for a long time, longer than usual. When it finally thinned, it left the faintest pattern in the fabric that didn't smooth even when I tried. That was the first morning I called Maeve. She answered on the second ring. I told her my name and where we'd met and that I needed to say something out loud to a person who wouldn't laugh. She didn't laugh. She didn't apologize for the distance between us or tell me what I wanted to hear. She said very gently, "Sometimes the children are lonely. Sometimes they like an anchor. The mistake is breaking the anchor with fear. Do not deny what's happening. Do not invite it to be bigger. If you can do neither, you will be fine. And if you can manage a small kindness, do that, but only once." "What counts as kindness?" I asked, because that sounded dangerous. "A story," she said. "A toy. A blanket on a chair. Something that shows you saw them. Then you say, 'I have to sleep without you now.' You have your place and I have mine. You say it out loud." "I took a sheet," I said, absurd and guilty. Maeve was quiet long enough that I thought we'd lost the call. "It doesn't matter what you carried in your suitcase," she said. "What you carried was the way you looked down when the hand was in yours. That's all it takes. I bought a small wooden top from a shop down the street that sells things you think you want when your hands are restless. I set it on the dresser opposite the bed. I spun it before I slept, not in a showy way, just enough to see it wobble into steadiness. I said, "Because you do the things you promise to the people who help you. This is yours for now. I'll leave it there. I have to sleep without you now. You have your place and I have mine." I looked stupid and felt better. I slept. I woke twice with the feeling of small weight and a giggle at my ear, and each time I said, "No, not harsh, not pleading, just a boundary, like a gate at the end of a path." Each time the pressure lessened as if a rule had been remembered. The last night before I wrote this, the top was on the floor in the morning. It lay on its side near the baseboard, as if someone had tried to send it under the dresser to keep it. The handprint on the pillow was different. The fingers were closer together, the palm lighter, and next to it, barely there, was another handprint, even smaller, inside the first like a memory inside a memory. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a challenge. It was a kind of apology my chest didn't know what to do with. I pressed the top into my palm until it hurt and put it back on the dresser and made the bed twice. I could end here and tell you that the laughter stopped and the handprints faded and the top stayed on the dresser and I slept like I used to. That would be easier for us both. The truth is softer and worse. It has learned my rhythm. Some nights are mine. Some nights belong to the space between my shoulder and ear, where the mattress dips for a small elbow. Some mornings I smooth the pillow and tell myself 5 minutes is a kind of mercy. Some mornings there is nothing and the apartment sounds like the inside of a shell. I go out more, which helps. I walk by the school down the street at dismissal and let the ordinary noise of children in this city fill me like a bright meal. I haven't told Elliot. Everything because he'd arrive with a toolbox and a schedule, and that would break a part of this I don't know how to name. I haven't thrown the sheet away because I can't shake the feeling that discarding it would be the same as ignoring a kid trying to catch your eye in a crowd. I haven't spun the top again, but sometimes it's moved in the morning, a few inches to the right. The line of dust along the dresser edge disturbed the way it would be if small fingers had dragged themselves there. This morning, before I sat down to write, I changed the bed. The window was a cold square as daylight tried to make its point. The radiator ticked and stayed quiet. When I smoothed the pillowcases, the fabric pulled, then released, the way it does when something light has been there and isn't anymore. I stood there longer than it makes sense to admit, watching the pillow as if waiting for a friend to come around a corner. The apartment felt balanced on a point I couldn't see. I made the bed tidy enough for a photograph and stepped back. Now as I type, I keep feeling that little giggle come and go like wind in the hallway. It doesn't get closer. It doesn't announce itself with threat. It's just there the way a place remembers what it has kept. I've started to think the churchyard is not the only place that is crowded and complicated. Maybe all our rooms are, wherever we touched hands with someone we couldn't see and then chose to look away. I'm gonna lay down in a minute because the day is heavy already. I will say the thing Maeve taught me clearly, the way you teach a rule to a child you love. I will leave the top where it is and the sheet where it must be and make a space beside me that is mine. Before I close this, I'll tell you something because you came this far and you're listening, like a person in the dark who needs to hear a voice. When I started typing, the bed behind me was smooth. A few minutes ago, there was a soft sound like a hand patting fabric once to check it. I didn't turn because I know what it looks like, but I can feel the way the air has changed near the pillow. A little pool of cold that's no one's fault. If I look now, I know what I'll see. 5 small dents, the shape of a hand that doesn't care about borders or flights or whether you paid to be told a story. I won't look yet. I'll look after I hit post. Then I'll make the bed a 3rd time, because that's the only ritual that feels like a promise I can keep. I don't care if anyone believes me. I just need to put this out there so I can sleep again. Stull is one of those places people joke about until they start listing directions that avoid it. If you grew up around Lawrence or Topeka, you know the name even if you've never seen the sign. It's barely a town, more like a brief widening of the road where the fields roll and the wind carries everything you say a little farther than you meant. I moved away after college and told myself the stories were something people used to scare freshmen. I could keep telling myself that until this spring, when I came home from my dad's heart procedure and ran into my old friend Evan at a Casey's. He looked older, like everyone does, but there was the same brightness in him that used to get me into dumb midnight bets. We stood by the coffee bar like people do when they're making small talk, because neither of them wants to talk about anything real. He asked how long I'd be in town. I said a week. He said we should go for a drive like old times. That was how it started. My sister Maya rolled her eyes when I told her I might see Evan. She never liked him much. She said he was trouble in a way that doesn't show up until 3 in the morning. I told her I was 35 and could make my own mistakes. She reminded me Dad didn't need any stress. There was nothing to worry about, I told her, and felt stupid for saying it. When someone says that in stories, you can hear the next thing coming. The next thing was a text from Evan a couple of nights later that just said, "You ever actually been to Stull after dark?" No question mark. He always wrote like his thumb was a dare. I typed that I was more of a daylight cemeteries person and he replied, "It's not like it used to be. Church is gone. It's just stones and a fence. Come on, man. I've got my uncle's work light." Then he sent a photo of a battered yellow portable light smeared with paint. He followed it with a photo of a 6-pack of something cheap. I told him I was trying not to be 20 anymore. He sent a smiley face with its tongue out and said he'd asked his cousin Lena to come. She knows the roads out there. No hassle, no trespassing, just looking around from the shoulder. Half an hour tops. The truth is I didn't want to go because after all the years I still remembered hearing the story at a freshman party about the missing boy. It was always a boy. Always someone younger than the person telling it to make it worse. The way I heard it, he went into the crumbling church at midnight on Halloween and never came out, and the kids outside heard him fall. The part that got me wasn't hell or devils. It was the idea of being underneath your friends while they say your name and can't reach you. Even now, writing that, I feel the skin on my forearms tighten. Lena drove because she said the county liked to sit out that way at night and ticket. She is one of those small tornadoes of competence you get in rural places, where you learn to do a lot because there's no one else around. She works at a garage in Eudora, and she wore a quilted flannel jacket and had a flashlight clipped to the visor. Evan climbed into the back with the work light and the beer, and I took the passenger seat. Everything smelled like hay and winter wheat and a little like oil from the shop. A weather app on her dash said south wind 5 to 10, but the windmills on the horizon weren't moving much. We drove through miles of fields and then down into the kind of half-valley you get when the land decides to dip for a while, and the air cooled the way it does when your car sinks between hedgerows. We passed maybe 2 houses with porch lights. Somewhere out there a dog barked and then stopped as if it remembered the time. "What do you want to do?" Lena asked. "I'm not trying to get anyone in trouble. I'll pull off by the fence. You can look from there. Just want to see it," Evan said. "I haven't been out since they knocked the church down." "They fenced it good," Lena said. "People were acting like idiots. Folks still come from out of state to do whatever YouTube tells them." I don't need to go in, I said, because it felt important to declare a limit. I just want to know it's a normal place, Lena snorted. Never met a place I would call normal, but sure. She found a gravel shoulder where wild sunflowers shivered, even though there wasn't much of a breeze. We stepped out into the kind of quiet that is big enough to be something on its own. The moon wasn't full, but it spilled enough light to make the stones throw short shadows, and the fence around the cemetery had that new metal gleam on the posts, but old wire between them. There were signs that said no trespassing and private property and cameras in use. There was nothing theatrical about the place. It was a patch of ground on a little rise with a handful of trees and stones in lines that weren't really lines anymore. I let some of the tension go. I don't know what I'd expected. Smoke, maybe. A smell like rot that would have at least been a signal my mind could use. We leaned on the fence. Evan set the work light on the hood of the car, but he didn't turn it on. I always picture it wrong, he said. Like a movie set. But it's just rocks. Rocks with names, Lena said. And I realized she was looking at one stone more than the others. She tilted her head as if she were listening through it. On the other side of the fence, near the middle of the cemetery, was a flat stone that looked different, newer, but weathered in a way that doesn't come from rain. It was as if hands had smoothed it. A low rectangle, flush with the ground. A grave marker that looked like a lid. Is that the one? Evan asked. With the story. That's not a real story, Lena said, but she said it softly. I heard it belonged to a family that moved, and they exhumed for a reburial, and the gossip mill turned exhumed into empty. People hear what they want to hear. You'd be surprised how often that happens. Empty is worse, I said, and I didn't know why I said it. I felt a little stupid at once because it sounded like a line. But the way the light struck the flat stone, I got that dizzy sense you sometimes get when you're on a second step in the dark, and your foot expects another. Something in me said now, and something else said not now. We stood there longer than made sense for a place we weren't going to enter. The crickets dialed up and down like someone turning an old knob. Every so often a car would pass far away, and for a second the sky would lose a star's worth of brightness. I felt the urge to speak and fought it because anything I said would sound try-hard. Evan, who had never minded sounding like anything, said, "If I climb the corner where the crossbar is low, I can be in and out, just to say I did it." Lena shook her head. "Don't be an idiot. I would literally just touch the flat one and step back," he said. "It's like touching the Stanley Cup but for morons." "Then why touch it?" I said. "Because you still talk about it," he said, and he wasn't teasing anymore. He watched me in the way old friends do when they want to remind you of who you used to be. "You still act like places can keep a hold on you. If it's regular, I can be regular again." "I'm not the one texting about Stull at midnight," I said, but I understood him. "Better than I wanted to," Lena sighed. "If anyone comes, you pretend we were never going to go in. If you fall and break something, I am not carrying you." She clicked off the visor light as if we'd need to be less obvious for a few minutes, which in turn made us more obvious. Evan walked along the fence to where the top wire ran lower and put his hands on the post. He looked over his shoulder like a kid about to steal a cookie. I opened my mouth to say no, and he swung his leg and was inside. He stood there with his hands open, grinning as if he were about to bow. "That's it," he said. "Look at me not being cursed. Touch the flat one and get back," Lena said. "Hurry up." He picked his way between stones the way you walk in a small kitchen when someone's asleep upstairs. He avoided the gopher holes in the ground with the ballet of someone who grew up in fields. The moon slid behind a thin cloud and came out again. When he reached the flat stone, he squatted and put his palm on it and said, "It's warm," I said, "from the day heat." "There wasn't much today," Lena said. Evan laughed softly. "Or maybe I'm the devil," he said. And I was about to tell him he was being the kind of dumb you grow out of, when a gust of wind ran across the grass, sudden and specific, as if someone had opened a door. It hit the fence and made the wire hum. The sound did something to the hairs on the back of my neck. Wind makes a dozen sounds. This one went on longer than it should have, and when it stopped there was a high ringing, the aftersound of something struck and still vibrating. "You hear that?" Evan said. He kept his hand on the stone. "It's like there's space underneath." "It's a grave," I said. I was mad at the waver in my voice. He lifted his palm, and the way he did it made me think of those prank videos where the guy pretends his hand is stuck on a freezer shelf and then yanks, laughing. But he didn't laugh. He rubbed his fingers together and said, "Feels like dust." "If anyone comes, Lena said again, but her voice was smaller. She didn't finish the sentence. We all felt it at once, the change. The crickets tipped toward quiet. The dog that had barked earlier threw one short bark into the night and then shut up again. The air went from cool to still. Out in the field beyond the cemetery, something rustled like fabric sliding across gravel. It was probably a deer, and I can write that now. But at the time, it didn't occur to me to think of anything with bones. The silence had edges. I heard my own breath and then heard that I was hearing it, the way you do under a blanket. "Guys," Evan said, and his voice broke in the middle. "There's air coming up from under it." I wanted to say that was impossible, or that it was mice or a drain, or my mind reaching an old vault with a pipe, but the words sat heavy and went nowhere. The hum in the wire came back, not from wind this time. It was like a power line far off. Evan stood and took a step backward. He looked different, a little shorter, and I thought it was the angle. "Okay," he said. "Okay, that's enough." I touched it. "Let's go." "Come back the way you went," Lena said, and she stepped closer to the fence. She reached her hands out like she would pull him by the shirt if she could. Evan took another step back, and his heel caught in something I couldn't see. He fell to one knee, and his hand shot out and landed flat on the stone again. The breath went out of him in a sound that made my heart jump against my ribs. The hum rose a notch. He jerked his hand back like he'd been stung. He stood swaying and said, "It's not," and didn't finish. I think he meant to say, "It's not right," or "It's not level," or "It's not dead." He turned to come toward us, and his face went slack in a listening way, like when you hear your name whispered from another room. "What?" Lena said, already angry because she was scared. "What?" "Did you say my name?" he asked, which is the worst sentence I have ever heard outdoors. He took a step toward us and then another step the wrong way, like his sense of direction had flipped, and then he corrected and came toward us quick. He got almost to the fence and then froze. I can't write this in a way that will make sense if you weren't there. It wasn't theatrical. There were no hands out of the ground. He just went still, as if he were listening to headphones only he could hear. His eyes flicked right then left, then settled on me, and in them was a question, and the recognition that he didn't want to ask it. "Who's behind you?" he said. I turned because that's what you do when someone asks that, and there was no one behind me. There was only Lena on my left and the car behind us and the fields and the little highway. When I turned back, Evan was a step farther from the fence. He hadn't moved in a way I could track. He looked back at the flat stone and then at me and opened his mouth. The hum became a tone, the way a glass sings when you run a wet finger along its rim. The tone grew and grew until I felt it in my teeth. My eyes watered. Evan winced and put his hands over his ears, but I don't think it was sound the way we think of it. I think it was pressure. He looked at us like he was trying to make it a joke. Look at me, guys, my head is a tuning fork, but the joke died. He bent, not from the waist, but as if something gentle and firm had put a hand on the top of his head. He bent, and his fingers scraped at the grass without catching anything. He straightened. He said very clearly, "Don't." I didn't realize until later that he might not have been talking to us. I don't know whether the ground shifted or my brain did. I saw the flat stone differently, not as a lid but as a mouth that had been taught to keep still when company came. A breath of cool air came up around my ankles, like the reverse of stepping into a root cellar in summer. My eyes watered again. The tone stopped as abruptly as it had started, and the crickets came back with a hitch like a choir trying to find the pitch after the organ cuts out. For a heartbeat there was normal night. I reached up and gripped the top wire to hold my body together, and then Evan said a thing that I will hear when I'm old and can't remember other things. He said, "It knows me now." "Back up," Lena said. Her voice was so steady it made me believe the world could be fixed by instruction. "Back up, you idiot. Turn. Don't look at it." "Look at us," he nodded. He took a step. He hooked his foot again on nothing and didn't fall, and then reached the fence and put his hands on it. I grabbed his wrist and felt that his skin was cool and damp. He swung his leg over and his shoe caught in the wire, and he made the exasperated sound he makes when he drops a screw in engine guts. The feel of his wrist in my hand is maybe the only reason I know I didn't dream all of it. I remember the tendons moving under my fingers. He cleared the fence and we were both on the gravel, and we were all laughing the brittle laugh of people who are not going to talk about it. Evan leaned with his back against the fence and touched the pocket of his jacket for his cigarettes, which he had quit. He didn't find any. He looked at the ground. "Okay," he said. "Okay, that was dumb. We're done," Lena said. She sounded like my sister. We're going back to town and you're buying gas station coffee and never asking me to do something like this again. We got in the car and none of us looked at the cemetery while we did it. Lena started the engine and the dash light washed us blue. We drove away at the speed of people who want not to be noticed by anything with authority. No one talked for the first mile. My heart slowed to only twice normal. The cheap beer in the back seat clinked. The road rose a little and the windmills showed again. I felt stupid. I felt relief. The two are cousins. At the second mile marker, Evan said, "You hear it still?" As if he were asking whether we could hear a siren somewhere that meant we should pull over. I said no. Lena made a non-committal noise. He touched his temple like he had a low headache. "It's quiet now," he said, and when I looked his eyes were shining with that weird brightness that isn't tears. He put his palm flat on the window glass and then took it away fast. "It's colder over here," he said. He moved his head side to side as if he were testing whether a space existed in the air near his ear. He shook himself like a dog. By the time we reached the Casey's, he was making normal jokes again. He bought coffee and then said he didn't want it and left it on top of the machine. He teased Lena about her terrible taste in music. He teased me about my jacket. He looked, in short, like someone who had decided to go on deciding that things were regular. He said he'd text tomorrow. He hugged Lena and bumped my shoulder with his fist and said, "Don't tell your sister." "Wouldn't dream of it," I said. The next morning, my dad's heart rate came up and the nurses smiled the way nurses smile when they see an excuse to say, "Good news." Maya and I went back to the house to swap off. I checked my phone, half expecting a text from Evan with a meme about demons. There was nothing. By afternoon, I sent him a message about a game that weekend. No reply. By evening, I called. It rang until voicemail, which was his voice telling me to leave something worth his time. I laughed because that was his thing, and then didn't leave a message because suddenly it felt like dropping a coin into a well. He texted late, after 11. "All good. Brain wonky. Catch you later." The words arranged themselves like he'd put them there with tongs. I asked if he wanted to come by the hospital for bad cafeteria pie. No response. I told myself he'd crashed or put his phone on silent. I told myself a lot of very reasonable things until they all sounded like the same thing. You can see the shape of where this goes, so I won't pretend the third day isn't a cliff. I woke to a call from Lena. She never called me. She texted. I answered with my voice all thick. She didn't say hello. She said, "Have you heard from your friend?" "He sent a text last night," I said. "Why?" "His truck is in front of his place. He's not answering." "I've got a key. I don't want to go in there by myself." I told Maya I was going out to pick something up. She looked up over her laptop and asked if I wanted company. I said no. I told myself I didn't want to explain. I drove to Evans and found Lena on the sidewalk, arms crossed tight like she was trying to keep the heat in, except it wasn't cold. We went up together. She said, "If he's hungover and naked, I'm leaving," which would have been a relief. He wasn't. The door opened and the first thing I noticed was the open window above the sink, because in Kansas you don't leave windows open unless you're there to argue with the bugs. The second thing was that his phone was on the counter, because he never put it down. The third thing was the coffee mug on the table with a ring of milk at the bottom and a skin beginning to form like a clear lid. "Evan," Lena called, and the sound of his name went up the stairs and then came back smaller. We went up. The bathroom lights were off. The bedroom was empty. The closet door was open as if someone had recently taken a jacket out and then changed their mind. The back door was locked. The house was a place where someone had been there and then wasn't. All at once in the way you see in movies, but which in real life is soft and minor, with shorts on the chair and a book open to a page that isn't a cliffhanger. There was no clue. The word clue feels dramatic. There was no story. We called, we waited. We called other people. We made the circle you make when you don't know what else to do. You don't need every detail of the day that followed. I don't either. There were deputies and neighbors and the quiet question of whether he had simply walked away. The phrase adult freedom was used. Lena told the deputy about our drive and the deputy's mouth made a line. He did not sigh, to his credit. He said other people go out there. He said it would be trespassing to go ourselves. He said he could ask a contact to swing by and take a look, though that ground is private and touchy, and in any case they weren't keeping an eye out for missing $20 work lights. I asked whether there were cameras on the cemetery fence, and he said something about the county and the church board and private parties. These are phrases in Kansas that mean people who see each other at the grocery store and don't always agree. Days after that stand together in my head like people waiting for a bus. I went back to the hospital and sat with my dad and watched daytime TV and then shut it off. When I slept, I woke hearing my name the way Evan had said he heard his. I told myself that was because my brain had a fresh recording of it. I told myself my mind didn't have anywhere else to put the story. On the 5th day, dates matter in these things if you keep track, we were allowed to go to Evan's with a deputy and a clipboard person. We stood in the kitchen again, and I stared at nothing so hard I started to see things in the texture of the paint. The deputy asked me to run through the night one more time. He was kind in the impersonal way of people who have seen several variations of the worst thing you can think of. He said 1,000 possible rational words that you already know. Stressed adults, debts no one knows about, small personal catastrophes that look like abductions. After they left, Lena put her hands flat on the counter and said, "I don't feel foolish for saying this. We should go back out there." "I promised the deputy," I said. "You promised him you wouldn't hop the fence," she said. "We can sit on the shoulder like church mice. We'll take nothing, leave nothing. And if I have a feeling at all that we shouldn't, I will turn around and you can throw something at my head for good measure." We went at twilight. We didn't talk much on the way. The windmills were moving again, slow and unimportant. We got to the same stretch of gravel and rolled forward a little until the cemetery opened to the right, and the fence showed its steel. I can tell you now that I didn't expect to see anything. I expected empty ground. I had constructed a fortress of plausible scenarios in my mind. I had stacked them like hay bales. When we parked, I found myself listening for the tone without confessing it. There was none. A car passed, and the gravel under its tires made that rapper crinkle sound they make. "We stood by the fence. Do you see it?" Lena said. She walked a little, her boots crunching. "Don't say yes if you don't." At first I didn't. The surface of the ground out there is like the surface of a lake on a windless day. You think it's flat until you notice it isn't. Then the light shifted with a thin scrape of cloud across the moon, and I saw it. The smallest thing. The flat stone at the center was a shade lower than it had been. If you saw photos from 2 nights apart, you wouldn't notice. If you know how to look at fields, you would. The lip of grass around the edge of the stone had a different posture, like it had been leaned on from above. I thought of Evan's palm. I thought of his heel catching on nothing. I thought of breath like a cellar. "We can't be sure," I said, and my mouth filled with the taste of old pennies the way it sometimes does when you panic and don't want to call it panic. "We can't be sure," she agreed. She squeezed the fence wire like she could wring information out of it. "Do you hear anything?" "No." "Me neither." She stood still a long time, then took a breath and let it out, a breath with arithmetic in it. "I want to try something." "Don't," I said, because the word had been preloaded in me. "I'm not hopping," she said. She took the flashlight off the visor and clicked it on and held it under her chin like kids do when they tell stories, then lowered it, embarrassed at the habit. She aimed the beam at the ground just in front of the flat stone, not touching it with light, only lighting the grass. She said softly and with no flourish at all, "If you know us, you can let him go." Her tone was matter-of-fact, like she was asking a stubborn bolt to turn. It was ridiculous, and if anyone had told me they had said something like that, I would have wanted to be kind and also to look at my watch. She clicked the light off. We waited. The insects did their work. Far off, a train passed, and the sound came late like always, and a red light blinked on and off at a crossing where we couldn't see the arms go down. "Okay," she said. "Okay, I'm sorry. That was dumb." We turned to leave. That is the honest truth, and also the kind of line someone writes when they want to make a story neat. We turned to leave, and I felt the smallest thing. The thing you would miss if you had a song playing quietly, or if you were thinking about whether you'd locked your front door. The tiniest shift in air pressure. The way your ears notice when an elevator begins to move. It barely registered as a thing. It was in my ears and the bridge of my nose. It was like the time a tornado passed 10 miles away, and the world got still and close and the radio hissed on the counter even though it was unplugged. I turned back so fast the wire bit my palms. The stone hadn't moved. The grass hadn't shivered. None of the theatrical things. But I knew. The way you know when someone is behind you in a hallway before they touch your shoulder, that a space had opened under something that had not outwardly changed. Lena said nothing. She clicked her light on and then off as if she had to tell her body that she still had hands. In the silence, something spoke. I wish I could give it to you here in a word that would prove that it happened. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't even sound. If you have ever been in a house where someone is sobbing on another floor, and you know it because the house tells you with the smallest tremors in the vents, it was like that, a shape of intention made of nothing. It settled through me like water through gravel. It did not have words. If it did, they were not in our language. But my mind, because it needed something to call it, gave it a sentence. We've traded names, then it was gone. And I was left on the side of a county road with my hands bleeding a little from the wire, and my friend not there, and a space under a stone that was as calm as a sealed envelope. We drove back without speaking. Lena put both hands on the wheel like a student and stared where the road meets the dark. At the Casey's, we didn't go in. We sat there listening to the pump click on and off for someone else. Finally, she said, "If you repeat that to anyone, you need to say it exactly as it happened. No adding salt." "I don't have salt," I said. "I only have whatever this is." "I told you," she said, and now she did sigh. "Every place is something, some more than others." After that, life did not organize itself into a story. Evan did not turn up the next morning full of apology. The deputies did not find a truck in a ditch. Time moved like a stubborn gate that only opens part way. We had a service that wasn't a service because without a body, there's a way people don't want to stare at a hole in logic. His uncle set the work light on the porch and left it there, and after a week he took it back into the garage and hung it on a nail and said, if someone needed it, they'd know where. I went back to my dad's and Maya made fun of my sad coffee and looked me in the eye like she does when she's trying to get me to tell the real thing, and not the version that will be easier for her to comfort. I told her I didn't know yet how to say it. She nodded and didn't push. Sometimes the good thing about siblings is the way they admit they can't fix your brain. I came back to my place 3 states away. The first night I slept hard like a rock because I hadn't slept much. The second night I woke at 12:13 with my heart running, and the very clear sense that someone had said my name outside my window, in a tone that was no tone, and from a mouth that was also a well. I sat up and listened and heard only the refrigerator, which makes a sound like someone rubbing a balloon. The third night I woke at 1:33 to the sensation of a draft across my ankles though my windows were shut. I told myself old houses breathe. On the fourth night I dreamed that I was walking through my childhood home and every door stuck the way doors do in humidity. And when I turned the knob to the closet at the end of the hall, there was a stairwell that did not belong there going down into limestone. When I woke, there was grit on the sheets at the foot of my bed, which was an absurd thing to find. I changed them and laughed aloud in the quiet because I could not do anything else that wasn't calling someone at a terrible hour and giving them a thing with no shape. The grit smelled faintly of damp stone. I told myself I had tracked in dirt from the yard and not noticed. I told myself a story and it did what stories do. It held the wall up for the night. Yesterday I got a text from an unknown number. It was short, and a glitch in the network made the letters arrive slow, one by one, which is a trick of reception and not supernatural. It said, all good. Brain wonky. Catch you later. It was the exact text he'd sent me the night after we went to Stull. I could screenshot it and you could argue with the timestamp, and it would not matter, because the argument would be about the wrong thing. I deleted it. Then I went and washed my hands, which were not dirty. Tonight, writing this, I opened a box of old things I brought back from my dad's. There's a shoebox with photos from college in it. In one of them, someone is taking a picture of us at a party where the walls were painted a color that looked good only in that year's catalogs. Evan is there with his arm around my neck, half headlock, half affection, and Lena is in the corner pretending not to look at us. The flash caught the dust in the air and made a galaxy. I stared for a long time at the doorway behind us where, if you look past the mess and the coats piled on the floor, it's just a normal door. You could say that behind it is a closet or a hallway. You could say that behind any door is anything you can put up with saying, I have tried to be careful with the telling because I don't want to hand the story to the part of my mind that likes to make things neat. I don't know what Stull is to the people who live nearest, except a place with stones and names where they would like us to leave them alone, and I can respect that. I don't know what we touched or if we touched anything at all. I know that a flat stone can be as much of a mouth as a hole is. I know that something can know your name without speaking. I know that if you stand in the right place at the wrong hour, you can feel a tone run through your bones that makes you aware of everything holding you together. I am telling you this because I want to put it somewhere outside of me. Sometimes when I walk through my house now, I find myself stepping over nothing, lifting my foot a little higher than the carpet requires, as if I'm negotiating a lip I can't see. It makes me laugh and then it doesn't. When I lie down at night, the smallest draft kisses my ankles, and I close my eyes and tell myself the vents are weird, and the seals need replacing, and the house is breathing the way old houses breathe. It's almost dawn as I finish this. The refrigerator hums. The neighborhood is quiet. Every few minutes there's a far train and the sound arrives lazy. In a little while the birds will start, which is the most human thing I know. I will send this and try to sleep. I don't have a conclusion you can hold. I have a drawer that sticks when it didn't used to, and the instinct as I put my hand on it to whisper, please, as if it's something with an ear. And sometimes when I wake just before 1:33, I don't open my eyes right away. I lie very still and listen the way you listen for your name when you're sure no one knows you're there. And in that hallway that isn't in my house, a stair shifts a fraction under someone's foot like a breath before a word. And it could be Evan, and it could be nothing. And in the quiet between those two possibilities is a space I have learned to leave alone. I'm writing this from a small apartment where the radiator knocks like it's sending messages, and I'm finally done pretending it was a trick of jet lag or old city weirdness. I don't need you to believe me. I just want the quiet that comes when you say a thing out loud and it stops pacing in your head. If you've been to Prague, you know how a single street can tilt you into a century you didn't come from. That was the first thing I noticed when I arrived last winter for a research fellowship. The way the light sloped down over the rooftops and slid into alleys as if the day itself had to squeeze through. I had 6 weeks to photograph tomb inscriptions and synagogue plaques for a small project back at my college. It sounds dry when I describe it, but I've always liked names cut into stone. They feel like a promise that someone once spoke them aloud. I rented a room above a bakery on a street that kept changing its mind about being quiet. Tourists rattled their luggage at noon. At dawn, the delivery van idled outside and breathed sweet steam into the stairwell. In the evenings, the old man next door fed the pigeons and argued with them. His name was Pavel. He introduced himself by knocking on my door with a plate of poppy seed kolache, which he held level like a waiter. The ghosts argue more than the birds, he said. You'll get used to it. The first person I really spent time with was Lena, an archivist from Brno who was in Prague for a few months to help with the same project. We'd never met, only emailed. She was smaller than I expected and wore knitted hats that made her look like a child about to go sledding. She laughed easily at my bad Czech and pretended to forget English on days she didn't want to talk. There was also Tomáš, a night watchman I met on the second week when Lena and I stayed late at the museum in the Jewish quarter and took too long with our notes. He had the comfortable heaviness of someone whose life is mostly spent standing still and watching clocks. I think he liked practicing his English with us. On our second night, he told us a story about guards who'd quit because of the lantern. He said it that way like it was a person you could meet in a room. At the cemetery, he said, and his face didn't try to be spooky. Sometimes the light moves where there is no path. It is older than the lamps. You see it and you follow, then you don't remember your name for a while. He tapped his chest, and then you do. And that's the bad part. I can't translate the shrug he gave, except it said that many things are true here because they have been told long enough to carve grooves for themselves in the air. You can search and find articles that brush the cemetery with a soft hand. The old stones pack so tight they lean like teeth, the way the ground is layered with centuries of burial, because there was nowhere else to put the dead. The tangle of ivy that makes everything look like it waited here, while history went elsewhere and then came back. The place is not big. You can walk it in 10 minutes if you don't care what you're seeing. But the way the stones lean and creep up on one another, it takes your depth perception away. When we filmed there for documentation, a guard named Marek trailed behind us with the patience of someone who has watched people get lost between rows you can see straight through. He was younger than Tomáš and more serious, with a beard that grew and uneven. The first time he really spoke with us was to scold me for stepping off the path to get a better angle. Here is not for convenience, he said. Later he softened and told me which fence boards were newer, which stones you could touch without crumbling them. Close to closing, when the gray light thickened and street sounds flattened, he pointed to a corner where the older stones were stacked like pages bent back. "If you see a flame there," he said, "you don't." Prague made me sleep badly. The radiator came alive and fell silent as if a hand had pressed down on it. Someone used the stairwell at precise times that did not match a normal human schedule. On the nights when the river fog climbed the hill and pressed against the bakery windows, my room held a cold that felt specific to my name. I called home and pretended that I'd eaten more than bread and cheese. Lena and I kept meeting and partying in the same cafes like we were part of someone else's schedule. Sometimes we hung out at a smoky bar with two copes of police who were always there, out of uniform, arguing about whether the new tram line was cursed because it had no number. Pavel slid notes under my door written in pencil, reminders about the bins, a request to stop feeding a cat I never fed, a phone number for his cousin who sharpened knives. He also left once a scrap of newspaper about a visiting historian who died in his hotel 3 years ago. The article said he had been found with his hand held up like he was trying to shield his eyes. A whisper of blue wax was found on the cuff of his shirt. I carried the clipping folded in my wallet without deciding why. The first time I saw the light, it was late enough that the city had given up pretending to be modern. Lena and I had stayed too long again, and Marek was walking us toward the gate with a set of keys that looked like small iron animals. The trees creaked in a way I first thought was wind, but then the noise kept coming in little repetitions like something insistently learning how to make a sound. We were nearly to the exit when Lena touched my sleeve and nodded to the left, where the stones pinched into one another like crowded shoulders. A lantern flame moved there. There was no lantern, not that I could see. No glass or handle to catch light. Just flame, steady and small. It didn't flicker like a candle in air. It glided as if enclosed in something you couldn't see. It didn't throw shadows. It didn't belong with the drizzle on the tree bark and the damp-bodied cold. Marek sucked in his breath like a little kid who just broke something, and I heard the metal keys shift against his belt. He said something quickly that I didn't understand. Then he put his hand on my arm, not screaming, not dramatic, just firm. "We go," he said. The flame moved another few inches, and I swear this is the part that will sound wrong. It seemed to turn a corner where there was none. Lena walked ahead, breathing fast. I watched the light. It drifted a foot or two, paused, drifted again. It was so easy to imagine there was a person carrying it, and you just couldn't see them because the dusk was stubborn at that hour. Or because your eyes were full of old names and lichen. I had the irrational, childish sense that if I looked hard enough, my eyes would adjust and I'd make out a shape. My brain kept offering me shapes, a coat, the blur of a shoulder, hands. But it wasn't like the things I've seen that turned out to be tricks. It stayed itself. As we approached the gate, Marek said something I did understand. "Don't watch." I realized then that I had not blinked normally for a minute. My eyes burned and teared. When I closed them, I saw the afterimage the way you do after staring at a light bulb. I looked away at the lock he was working. While the metal squealed open, the flame shifted again, closer to where we had just been. I smelled something that wasn't candle or oil. It reminded me of wet stone getting hot in summer, a mineral kind of heat. We stepped out into the alley, and the modern city shouldered the moment away. A tram rattled past. A woman shouted at her kid. The sky was a uniform sickly orange from somewhere beyond the river. Marek closed the gate and leaned his forehead against it for a second like a devout person. Lena said in a soft voice she normally used only for manuscripts, "Do you see its feet?" I didn't understand. Then I remembered what Tomasz had said and what Marek hadn't. Lena raised her phone on reflex and Marek reached out and pushed her hand down without looking at her. "You don't want to bring that into your mirror," he said. I could have shrugged it off the way people shrug off everything that would make life smaller if they believed it. The problem was the second time. A week later, Lena got the flu that knocks you down like asleep. She texted that the walls were breathing in her hostel, and an American guy kept microwaving fish. I went alone to photograph a few stones we'd missed. The light was good. The guard at the gate was an older man with a white mustache that looked like it needed winter. He took my student pass and glanced at the date. "You are the one who looks too long," he said pleasantly, which was the kind of thing a stranger in Prague could say, and it wasn't particularly alarming. It was quiet inside except for a distant scrape that turned out to be a gardener with a rake. I moved carefully on the path. I kept my feet where others had kept theirs for a long time. I was near the back corner when the air changed temperature so sharply, my breath made a shape in front of me. It wasn't the kind of cold that comes on with weather. It had a location which made me think of open refrigerator doors in old apartments and the way they leak. I tilted my head and registered it as a shape, an absence that wanted to be the size of a person. A pale glow stretched in the corner of my eye. When I turned, the flame was there in that polite way it had, like a visitor who doesn't want to interrupt you. I'm not proud of my reaction. I raised my hand exactly like the man in the newspaper had done, a reflex to block too bright things. The light wasn't bright, it was honest. It made the cold plainer and the stones darker and the air thinner. I tried to look past it 2 feet behind it where any human would be. I didn't see anyone, and then something else happened that is hard to explain without sounding like I'm adding to it. The air near the flame thickened a little and took on edges, like heat mirage in summer, the way it makes the far road look poured and trembling. In the trembling, I could almost make out the shape of a mouth that wasn't a mouth. It was a place where a mouth should be and wasn't. Something held it closed. The impulse to speak came over me before the thought did. I whispered my name. The flame burned a fraction of an inch higher, and then very softly leaned as if nodding. My legs carried me back to the main path. Twice I caught myself stepping off and twice corrected, like I wasn't in charge of knowing where to place my feet. The light kept pace, never hurrying, never far. It wasn't threatening. That's important for you to understand. It felt like a person matching my speed, someone whose footsteps you can't quite hear because the gravel is damp. I think that's why I didn't run. The gate came into view as if it were a memory instead of a real thing. The older guard was there, chatting with a couple in thick winter hats. He saw my face and stopped mid-nod. He glanced past me. His hand closed on the keys and he said, "Prosim," in a way that wasn't an apology or a request. He stepped aside and I made the mistake of looking back over my shoulder. The flame had come closer than before, enough that if it were in an actual lantern it would have warmed my hand. I smelled that mineral heat again, and beneath it something like singed thread, like the sharp smell from a needle when you take it out of the candle to loosen the wax. I went back the next day because life asks you to keep doing the thing you came for even when something has spoken your name. The sky had cleared to the too blue of cold days. My hands hurt even with gloves. I worked quickly and didn't linger on the inscriptions like I liked to. I kept turning, expecting the light and feeling stupid when it wasn't there. Lena texted that she was awake and wanted soup. We arranged to meet at a cheap place around the corner that boiled potatoes until they tasted like apology. Marek walked by the gate and tapped his keys against the metal, a sound that felt like clearing a throat. "Sometimes," he said, falling into step with me, "the flame is a kindness. He shows you a way that is not yours." I asked him who he was without saying the rest of the sentence, and is he a story or a job description? Marek lifted one shoulder. They used to say a man who did not get to be buried right, or a bearer of lantern for the Chevra, the burial society. He worked until he forgot to stop. There are arguments. This city is mostly arguments. That night the radiator knocked in a way I had learned was the pipes equalizing and not a person. Pavel left another note about the bins. I slept until something woke me that I thought was my own name said from far away. It might have been a dream. It might have been the cat's. You know how you sometimes bolt upright with your heartbeat in your mouth and refuse to think that someone has just said your name in the room? The window was a rectangle of orange from a street lamp. The glass had that old waviness that makes the world look like it's remembering itself. I listened. The bakery van wasn't there yet. No neighbors. Then a soft click like metal touching glass. I rolled carefully out of bed and walked to the window. Outside, across the narrow alley, the opposite wall wore the same stains and old posters as always. Below, the cobbles were wet and had caught the light. And there, at the corner where the alley turned toward the river, a dim blue shape pulsed like someone cupping a candle in their hands and then opening them a little. It wasn't bright. Blue never is. But it was definite. The flame leaned toward my building and then leaned back, a private gesture, like the way a person looks over a shoulder to invite you along. In the morning, I told myself it had been a reflection from the tram wires. A car radio, someone lighting a cigarette with theatricality. I told myself a lot of things. I didn't tell Lena because I wanted to see her eyes without my story colored in them. She seemed better. Ate half my potatoes, told me about her hostile roommate who sang lullabies to herself in a language neither of them spoke. I told her about the guard calling the flame he. She shrugged. If you work in a place long enough, you feel polite toward it. Maybe that's all. We went back to work. Dusk came early as if it had another appointment. I suggested we finish for once well before closing. Lena said fine, but we were two distracted children, checking our phones like a way to hold on to the normal. That's probably why I left my notebook on the bench by the gate, where I'd set it down to put my gloves on. By the time I realized we were halfway down the alley. "It's fine," Lena said. "Wait here. I'll grab it." I turned with her out of habit, then forced myself to stay. The cold found the gap between my scarf and my hair and settled there. The alley was empty except for a woman walking a small nervous dog that kept stopping to consider the world. I listened to the tiny sound of its claws on the stones and used it as a tether. Lena was gone 3 minutes. Then 5, you learn what your own fear tastes like in your mouth. Behind the gate, footsteps shifted and keys sighed and someone laughed too close to the ground. I was ready to go in when I saw it because of course I saw it. A pale light inside at the corner near the older stones. It passed behind a thorny bush and painted each spike with white. Then it moved again, deliberate, the sort of slow that is not caution but assurance. I had the insane thought that it was looking for what I'd left behind. I went to the gate and called for Marek or anyone, but the word stuck to the cold and didn't go far. I rattled the iron. The latch gave and I slipped inside without thinking about rules or years of warnings. The air felt dense. I walked the path. The light drew a line ahead and then paused. I followed the way you follow a person who insists there's a shortcut. Twice I tried to call Lena's name and twice my voice failed like it had clothes on it. The flame shivered and the tiniest fleck of blue jumped and landed again as if it were breathing. I remember silly things. The way a label on a stone had curled up at the edge. A dropped ticket stub lodged in wet leaves. The smell of damp thread. When I turned the next corner, the light was there, closer to the ground this time. Close enough to warm my face. Close enough to show by the light it did not cast that something stood between us. There was the unmistakable sense of a person not seen, whose mouth was where a mouth ought to be but whose teeth were buried in thread. I took one step back, then another. The flame tilted. It rose as if on an inhale. My name brushed the inside of my ear the way a hand brushes a lint from a coat. I don't know how else to say that. It wasn't a voice like a stranger on a bus. It was my own name the way my mother had said it when I was small and asleep in the car. I froze. The cold pressed against the back of my legs like a bench. The flame leaned toward a narrow cut between stones where the ground had heaved. It came even with my shoulder and hovered. I understood what it wanted. I also understood that I could say no. Saying no felt like pressing your palm against a pane of glass that's colder than you are. I stepped where it indicated into a space so tight I had to turn sideways, past a stone that breathed out the smell of rot that isn't rot, only old rain. Around that corner, tucked against a low wall, was my notebook. The cheap elastic band holding closed a few pages that hadn't been there. When I left it, I reached and as my fingers touched the cardboard, the flame dropped and went small as if satisfied. "Lena," I said, and my voice came back. She answered from 10 feet away in a very ordinary tone. "Got it," and came into view with the bar of light from her phone cutting a piece out of the dusk. She said she'd been talking to Marek by the office and the gate had stuck and what was wrong with my face. Did I smell smoke? She didn't smell anything. I said I was fine and that my notebook was here. And she made a face at me because that wasn't where I'd left it. We left. The guard locked up and told us to sleep. A tram clanged. The world resumed its shape. The next days were a manageable version of strange. The radiator knocked and I knocked back. Pavel complained about a teenager on the second floor who skateboarded inside. The police at the bar argued about whether anyone still paid for newspapers. I avoided my mirror at night because sometimes I saw, instead of my face, the kind of caved-in blur that comes when a candle moves behind frosted glass. I rearranged my desk to put the mirror behind me. I caught myself standing still in doorways like someone listening at the bottom of the stairs for a child to wake. When the bakery van came at dawn, the alley filled with white breath and soft voices, and if I was already awake, I sometimes heard a click like glass being set gently on stone, followed by nothing. Once on my way home, I saw black smudges on the wet cobbles that ran in a path and then stopped cleanly, as if feet had remembered themselves only up to that point. No one else paused. A dog sniffed and would not walk across. I tried to be rational. I counted repetitions. I avoided late hours and refused to turn toward the corner of the cemetery, when the light there became, over days, as familiar as a neighbor's window. The problem with avoiding a thing is that it begins to move to meet you. The flame began appearing at corners blocks away, at the end of a street that sloped toward the river in the reflection of a shop window that was dark inside. I told myself it was the winter light catching on 1,000 little surfaces, glass and frost and the formal polish on a brass door handle. I told myself Prague is a city that knows how to light itself, and I was seeing the hum of it. The night before I was due to go home, I walked over the bridge just to take myself somewhere open. The river carried ruins of ice. A busker on the near side sang a song I did not recognize in a voice that made you think of doors half closed. When I turned back, I saw on the water not a reflection, but a kind of glow that was not where the lamps were. It held itself together in a way reflections don't. It pulsed twice as if breathing and then leaned toward the shore, toward me. My name came up through the planks like warm air from a bakery. I leaned over the rail, and for a second, under the habit of who I am, under the person other people think they know, was the feeling of stepping toward it because it had marked me as the one to follow. A voice behind me said, in English, not today. It was Tomasz. He had that night-off looseness you see on people who wear uniforms. He came to stand next to me and put both elbows on the rail in a way that made the gesture so ordinary, the extraordinary had to go sit on a bench. Sometimes, he said softly, it finds a person who listens to names, archivists, teachers, parents, people who like small letters carved clean. He didn't look at me. He looked at the water like everyone else. It is not a hunter, he said. It is a bearer. It carries the light that people carried for the dead. It asks you to carry it a little while. We watched the river together until the blue softened and was everywhere and nowhere like a bruised sky. Tomasz sighed and tapped his chest with 2 fingers the way his keys tapped the gate. We are all torches, he said, but you can put yourself down. The night before I left, I slept a lot and not at all. My suitcase lay open like a mouth waiting. I checked the lock on my door and then checked it again because the flame sometimes made me do things twice. At 3, the radiator sighed and then the room cooled in that precise way again, a cold that picks you out of the general. A shape of breath fogged the window from the outside. I went to it because pretending not to go wouldn't make me safer. At the far end of the alley where it turned, the blue shivered. No footsteps, no person, just a promise that was not a threat unless you made it one. I thought of the visiting historian in the clipping. I thought of the way the light had leaned toward my notebook and not me. I thought of blue on water and blue on stone and the smell of singed thread. I raised my hand the way he had and my fingers felt warm, like an animal had breathed on them. I whispered my name once because pretending I hadn't wouldn't undo that it knew it. The flame brightened not in triumph but in recognition. Then it lowered itself a small bow and drew back. It took a step that wasn't a step and was gone around the bend to a place that has been turning a corner for 400 years. In the morning I left. Pavel wasn't there to collect the keys. I slid them under his door with a note thanking him for the kolach and apologizing for a cat I never fed. The bakery woman hugged me as if she had known me longer than 6 weeks. In the taxi, I watched the city drop behind. At the airport, I bought a bottled water I didn't drink. The plane rose. Clouds swallowed the red roofs and the blunt towers and the narrow old arguments. I slept badly and woke to the gray of home and the new clarity a flight can give. At my apartment, the radiator is a more polite person. The streetlight outside is not orange but a clean white that makes the window a sharp square. I have mirrors, though I leave my largest turned to face the wall because occasionally I see what looks like heat in glass where there is only me. Last week I opened my mailbox and found inside, jammed behind flyers and a coupon booklet, a stiff paper tag like the ones tied to keys at desk drawers in old buildings. It smelled faintly of wax and old thread. On one side was my name in an ink that had bled a little, as if someone wrote it with a nib and pressed too hard. On the other side was a number that means nothing in my life. I phoned Lena and described it. She said with a soft laugh that wasn't a laugh, "Maybe he's making sure you get home. Maybe he's only doing his job. Now the radiator knocks, and sometimes I knock back and sometimes, at the corner by the shop where they copy keys, a small bright thing lifts and lowers like a greeting cupped in a hand. I have new habits. I don't look too long at reflections after midnight. I don't follow light into small places, not even the kind on my phone when it slips under the couch and waits for me to bend down. When someone says my name from the next room, I say it back to prove it belongs to me. On the desk is the notebook I thought I lost. If I open it to the page with the rail-thin handwriting of a woman who died in 1834, the ink feels warm under my finger. That might be my imagination. It might be the way paper keeps the heat of hands, or it might be that somewhere, in a city that is mostly arguments, a man with blackened feet and a quiet bow is doing what he always did, carrying the light where the ground is layered with names and asking the living to mind how they walk between them. Because the flame knows your name and, like all polite things that have very old work to do, will not force you to follow until you decide to turn the corner and find out whether you are the sort of person who carries it well. I never planned to be the kind of person who posts a ghost story online, but I need to get this out of my head before it eats through the rest of my life. If you live near Miramichi, you already know the name. French Fort Cove. The place with the boardwalks and the dark water and the legend people joke about until the trail light hits a patch of fog and everyone walks a little faster. I used to be one of the people who laughed. My friend Mason and I told the story to scare tourists when we worked summer shifts at the kayak rental. We had a script. 18th century murdered nun, head never found, rosary still dripping. We said it with a grin. I even kept a rubber rosary in the drawer to shake behind my back while I told it. I don't work there anymore. I moved 3 towns over and I changed my phone number. I drink a lot of coffee at night and I keep the lamp on even when I sleep on the couch. I also check the bathroom mirror twice. You know, the little things you pick up when you decide you like staying alive. The last message I got from Mason sits at the top of an old email thread like a thumbtack. "Let's go one more time before the season ends," he wrote. "You owe me a night paddle for bailing in July." He added a winking emoji and the words, "No head jokes." That was the day before we went out there with my sister, Claire. Claire didn't believe in anything, not even weather forecasts. She's practical to the point of rude sometimes. She works at a clinic, and after a few years of listening to people describe vague foot pain, the patience for whimsy burns off. But she'd promised to pick me up from the shop, and when Mason suggested a late loop around the cove before the park closed, she rolled her eyes and said fine. It was a Thursday in late September. The air had that cold that sits on your teeth. A few leaves were already crisp underfoot. The last families were packing their cars. A park ranger with a gray beard waved once and locked the rental shed while I took one of our old paddles out of the rack, and Mason checked the straps on his headlamp. There's a bend on the water where the trees lean inward. People take wedding photos there. The boardwalk twists like ribbon through it, and in early evening light it looks almost fake. We carried the canoe down like we'd done 100 times. A couple from Moncton was wrestling with an inflatable kayak nearby, laughing at themselves. Someone's dog shook off and sent spray across my jeans. It felt normal, even comfortable. And if you had paused me there and told me to trust my gut, I would have said my gut felt like a warm engine. No dread, no omen. Just the stubborn smell of wet cedar and the dumb rhythm of the paddle on my shoulder. The water in the cove is dark. It's not dirty. It's just the tannins, the way the bog colors everything tea brown. When a light hits it, it glows in slices. We slid the canoe out and climbed in, and the hull did that gentle hollow knock against the boardwalk that feels like a heartbeat under your feet. Mason took the back. I took the front. Claire perched in the middle seat with her arms crossed. We were the last boat out. Somewhere in the trees, a crow did that metallic cough crows do when they're bored. We paddled slow. The trail lights winked on behind us one by one as if the cove was watching us go. Mason said nothing for a while. He had that look on his face that means he's writing a story in his head and trying to decide if he wants to perform it. "No head jokes," Claire repeated without looking up. "He promised," I said. Mason cleared his throat. "Okay, but one question. In the story, where do you think she keeps it? The head, I mean. Assuming it's not, on her. Does she tuck it like a football? Float it beside her on a little pillow?" Claire leaned forward and pinched his sleeve. "Stop. It's not cute after sunset." We reached the narrows where the cove necks down and the reeds crowd in. A breeze came off the water and combed the surface into shivers. The light changed in that way that makes your chest tighten. One moment it's blue and gold, and the next it's flat, like someone put a gray lid over the sky. We floated there for a minute listening. You could hear the boardwalk creak when someone walked it, but there was no one up there anymore. Just the gentle clack of our paddles against the gunwale, and underneath that, something small tapping in a pattern like fingernails on a desk. We weren't the only people who used to bring props to scare each other. Mason had a box in his trunk with cheap Halloween junk, foam skulls, a hand that grabbed when you clapped, a little speaker that whispered in Latin. I thought about that box the first time I heard the tapping. I wanted it to be him, but the sound wasn't near us. It was below us, off to the right, where the reeds made a black triangle against the water. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap, tap. It wasn't a woodpecker. It wasn't a frog. The rhythm felt human in a way I hate trying to explain. Hear that? Mason said quietly. Claire raised her chin. Probably a rope hitting a dock, she said. There's no dock there, I said. It's just bog. The headlamp on Mason's forehead cut a bright coin into the gathering dark. He angled it right and we all leaned with it. The reeds trembled, but not like wind, more like something underneath brushing them as it moved. The tapping stopped. The wind hissed back through the cove, and with it came a smell like old pennies and candle wax. The canoe rocked. Let's go back, Claire said. She didn't say it in a joking voice. She said it like a nurse telling you the needle will be quick if you don't move. Mason dipped his paddle. 1 more minute, he said. Look, I didn't want to look. I looked anyway. A strip of lighter water ran between the reeds like a path, and in the middle of it something pale hovered just under the surface. At first I thought it was a plastic bag. It rolled once and a bubble lifted free. Then the headlamp caught an edge and I saw the shape wasn't soft like a bag. It had contours, a cheek, an eye socket as a hollow shadow. It wasn't detailed, not the way you're imagining. It was like seeing your reflection in a spoon, the suggestion of a face underwater. It drifted closer without ripples, as if the cove itself was pushing it. Mason, I said. My voice had that thin thread in it you usually only hear on recordings of yourself. He didn't answer. The face, or whatever it was, reached the surface and the skin of the water didn't break. The surface held like a film. The headlamps we wore made small white moons on it. I stopped breathing for a second and heard the blood in my ears. The thing rose until it lay on the skin of the cove like an egg under the membrane of a bowl of soup. It turned slowly. An eye was a deeper shadow in the shadow. The mouth was a darker line inside the idea of a mouth. Claire whispered, "It's a trick of light." She said it 3 times. I watched the line of the mouth tremble. It didn't open the way a mouth opens. It was like the line waved, like heat waver on pavement, and the tiniest bubbles threaded up into the cold air. And the smell of pennies and wax grew until I could taste it. The line moved in a pattern that felt like words. I don't know Latin, but I knew praying when I heard it without sound. The boardwalk groaned far behind us. That small, simple noise cut through whatever trance we were in. The face slid back under. I blinked hard and the film of water went back to being water. Mason said, "We have to go." It wasn't dramatic. He said it like a fact. We turned the canoe with clumsy pull and sweep strokes and it felt like paddling through syrup. The headlamp beam jittered on the reeds. The tapping started again, this time behind us, and I didn't want to think about how tapping could be behind if the thing was in front. We moved. The canoe picked up and then stopped again as if the water itself had a grip on the hull. There are places in that cove where logs lie hidden under the surface. I thought we'd caught on one. I leaned over to rock us free and saw through the brown water a pale band hooking around the middle of the canoe. My brain gave me the word belt. It made no sense. It looked like a belt someone holds while guiding a kid across a street. I didn't touch it. I just stared and then looked at Mason. He had his paddle braced hard and his jaw clenched. "Don't speak," he said, and his voice was not a voice I'd heard from him before. "Don't answer," he said. "We're not being asked a question," I said, but he shook his head and I shut up. The belly of the canoe slid forward. The band loosened without leaving a ripple, and the cold came up through the bottom like it was in the material of the boat and then not. We made the turn into the wider part of the cove. The world felt open again, like a lid had been lifted. I was breathing too fast. Claire was too. When the rental dock appeared ahead, I almost cried from something like relief. The park was nearly black. The trail lights showed the shape of the parking lot in dots and short lines like a low constellation. The ranger's truck was still there. He was standing next to it talking to someone I didn't recognize, a woman in a long coat. When we scraped up, he stepped forward. He had that look people get when they're trying to decide if they should call someone else. "You 3 okay?" he asked. He kept his voice light, but his eyes went to the water and then back to us fast, like he didn't want to see what he might see. Mason nodded too quickly. Claire said, "We're fine." I lied and said, "Just a log under the surface." The woman in the coat frowned. Her hair was braided tight. She had a face I don't know how to describe except to say it looked like someone who has stood outside in all kinds of weather and is not impressed by any of it. "You shouldn't be on the water after the lights come on," she said. The ranger glanced at her and then at us again. "Take your time getting your land legs," he said. "No rush out of here." We strapped the canoe to the rack. My hands shook more than I wanted them to. The woman in the coat watched us. She wore gloves even though it wasn't that cold. "You saw something," she said, not as a question. Mason said nothing. He took off his headlamp and knotted the strap around his fist as if that would keep something in. "I know the story," Claire said, impatient and brittle. "Everyone does." The woman nodded once. "Yes, everyone knows a version. Doesn't matter. It's not for tourists. It's a warning for locals who get too confident." She looked straight at me. "It doesn't want your fear. It wants your attention." The ranger cleared his throat. "Okay, Martha," he said gently. "Let's not spook everybody." Martha smiled at him without humor. "They're already spooked." "That's the point." We left. The parking lot felt too large, the shadows too organized. At the edge of the lot, a police cruiser nosed in. The driver, Constable Lewis, who'd bought a kayak from us in June, rolled down his window and lifted a hand. "Rounding up late walkers," he said. "Kids jump the fence this time of year." He blinked at our faces. "You three look like you saw a moose." Claire exhaled. "We're fine," she said for the third time. "Just tired." He laughed once, the kind of laugh you use on people who might cry, and drove past us toward the trailhead. We drove to the Tims near the bridge. The fluorescent lights looked rude after the cove, but also like medicine. Mason ordered 3 coffees he didn't drink. We sat in a booth and listened to the hiss of the milk steamer and the clack of trays. The radio over the counter played a song I used to love, and I hated it in that moment because it made everything in the last hour sound like a scene in a movie. A couple of teenagers came in with skateboards and scuffed the floor and argued about fries. A woman from the night shift at the nursing home stared at her phone and rubbed her eyes with one thumb. Life kept going around us with a loud normalcy I wanted to hold in both hands and press hard against my chest. "I'm sorry," Mason said finally. He stared at his coffee lid. "I shouldn't have made the joke." Claire shook her head. "It wouldn't matter," she said. "It doesn't need your joke to exist." She looked at me. "You saw it too." I nodded. My mouth had felt dry since the dock. "It said something," I said. Not out loud, but it said something. Mason swallowed. I heard it in my head. Not like a voice, like a memory of a voice. Claire rubbed her arms like she was cold. "We're going to do the thing people do in stories where they promise not to go back," she said. "And then one of you will. Don't. If it needs you, it'll find you without you helping." We went home to our separate places. The next morning, Mason sent me a text that said, "We're going to laugh about this by the weekend." By lunch it was, "Headache. I think I'm just tired." By evening it was, "Never mind." He didn't answer when I sent a string of question marks. I drove to his apartment the next day. His car was in the lot. His upstairs neighbor, a guy with a Red Sox tattoo, turned down his TV and leaned over the railing when I knocked. He left early, he said. Like 5 a.m. early, backpack and boots. Didn't look at me when I said hi. I went home and sat on the floor by my couch instead of on it. I watched the lamp for a long time like it was a fireplace. Claire called and told me not to go looking. If he wants to camp it out of his system, let him. I didn't say the rest of what I was thinking out loud because saying it would make it simple, and this wasn't simple. 2 days passed. The weather held gray and close. The news carried the usual small-town shuffle of break-ins and minor collisions, and the farmer's market's new squash display. I kept my phone near me like it might float away if I didn't pin it with my palm. On the third morning, I went to the shop to drop off the last of my paperwork from summer. The rental shed smelled like nylon and wet rope. The new supervisor, a kid still in high school, showed me a pile of lost and found with a smile too wide for the room. "People leave the weirdest things," he said. "Someone left this." He held up a rosary. It was wood, dark from oil, and the cross on it had a figure worn almost smooth. I don't know if it was the same one Martha had muttered about at the dock, but my stomach still flinched like it recognized a hand. That night, Mason's sister called me. "He's not back," she said, voice controlled like she was telling a doctor the facts, only the facts. "He left a message for my mom at 4 a.m. Sunday. He said he needed to check something at the park." "He never checked something at the park." Her laugh died half-finished. "We called constables. They're looking." I told her what we'd seen. I did not say the part about the band around the canoe because I didn't know what it meant, and saying it felt like signing something. When we hung up, I put on a jacket and drove. I told myself I was just going to the parking lot to see if his car was there. I told myself I wouldn't get out. You know what I did? His car was there. A little white hatchback with a dent above the rear wheel. A thin crust of dried mud around the tires. A receipt on the dashboard for a breakfast sandwich he liked. The ranger's truck wasn't around, and the trailgate stood open for maintenance. The cove is different at night. It's not just dark. It's layered. The first layer is the light on the path. The next is the brush, all the little sounds small animals make. Behind that is the water, which has a sound that's more like silence made of breath. I stepped onto the boardwalk. The wood had taken on a little frost. My shoes made whispers. You are probably thinking a sane person would have called someone. I did too. My hand hovered over my phone 3 times, 4. It's a simple thing we do, this thinking of rational plans that are 1 or 2 steps behind what we're already doing with our feet. I went to the bend, the place where the trees lean in. The water held the sky like a bruise. The wind came off it in lazy pushes and then stopped altogether like it was listening. I didn't say his name. Claire's voice in my head said not to answer, which is the same as saying not to call out and get an answer. I stood there and tried to feel nothing and only managed to feel too much. When the tapping started again, I didn't jump. I wanted to, but I think some part of me had been waiting for it since the dock. It came from the same triangle of reeds. Tap, tap, pause, tap. It was slower, as if someone was thinking hard between each little strike. I took 1 step down the spur of the boardwalk that jutted closer to the water. The rail was cool under my hand. I looked out and saw the line through the reeds again. A path. The surface of the cove grew still in a way that made the hair on my arms rise. A thin ribbon of pale moved under the brown, as if someone were dragging a long bone just under the skin of the water. I don't know what I expected to see. Not that. Not that undetailed no-face that is still somehow a face. It rose and lay on the surface as before. The mouth line wavered. The smell of candles and metal came up like breath from a cellar. My eyes stung. A few words came into my head, not as sound, but like when you remember the tune of a nursery rhyme you haven't sung in a decade. Not English. Not French. Something older that made the memory center of my brain ache. And then, behind those not words, something I did understand. A shape of meaning that wasn't letters. Not where is he? Not give him back. Those would be demands. It wanted attention, Martha had said. So I gave it attention. I held its gaze, if gaze is what you call it when an eye is a hollow. And I thought of Mason's stupid jokes and the way his laugh always did a little hiccup at the end. I pictured the dent over his wheel and how he never fixed it. I pictured the way he had said, "Don't speak with a stranger's voice." I pictured the map of the cove pinned on the rental shed wall with pushpins where kids had lost shoes. I pictured the way light sits on brown water like a heartbeat. The face slid a fraction and the tapping changed to a steady, rapid counting, as if marking off seconds. Something else rose beside it. Not a face. The pale band. It lay across the water and then tightened as if trying to remember a shape it used to make when wrapped around a waist. In it there were tiny knots, places that caught the light like beads. For 1 hateful second I thought of Mason's headlamp strap, and I pictured it knotted around his fist. The band flexed. The boardwalk under my feet shifted as if someone had stepped onto it from far away. Behind me a boot scraped wood. I turned. Martha stood at the start of the spur, coat closed and gloves on. She must have moved like fog because I hadn't heard her. She raised 1 finger to her lips and then pointed at the water. Her face was stern and oddly sad. We watched together, strangers in parallel. She murmured something I couldn't catch. The tapping slowed. The band loosened. The face turned. And for the first time I had a sudden ugly thought that it wasn't looking for its own head at all. Maybe that was never the point. Maybe it was looking to see who was looking. To see who would lean in and hold their breath and start thinking in someone else's words. Martha stepped up beside me. "You can tell it he is not yours," she said softly, as if talking to a child who is about to do something with a hot stove. "You can say it in your own way, not out loud." I thought the sentence as if I were writing it with a finger on the inside of my skull. "He is not yours. Not because we deserve him more. Not because we are stronger. Just because sometimes claiming is the only thread a person has to hold." The face didn't change. The water is not a face that can change. But the sense of attention shifted, like when someone across a room stops listening to you and starts listening to someone else. The tapping stopped. The band on the water lay slack and then faded. The smell thinned. In the distance, a fox called once, high and brief. The face slid under without bubbles, and the surface of the cove was just surface again. I realized my hand hurt from gripping the rail. Martha let out a breath that made a small cloud. "Go home now," she said. "Don't bring friends." I wanted to ask where Mason was. I wanted to ask if people came back from whatever it was and how. Instead, I nodded. We walked back in silence. The trail lights hummed. At the lot, Constable Lewis's cruiser was parked at an angle, door open. He stood with his phone pressed to his shoulder, listening to a voice that was making his eyebrows climb. He saw us and waved absently. "We found his pack at the overlook," he said when he hung up. "No damage. Just set down neat." That's almost weirder. He searched our faces for something and then seemed to decide he didn't actually want it. "If you hear from him, you call." Martha touched his sleeve once in a gesture that said what it said without needing words. He nodded like he understood, but we both knew he didn't. Mason didn't come home that night. Or the next. They found footprints that went to the water and stopped in a place where the mud is firm enough to hold a track, and then not. People like to tell stories about footprints that stop. It bothers them less than the idea of footprints that turn back and circle and never leave the loop. The same ranger with the gray beard called me on Monday. He said the search would go to a lower tempo. He said those words like he had a list on a clipboard, and that phrase was the next checkbox. I sat on the floor again and watched the lamp again, and the shadow of the lampshade rim looked like a horizon line I couldn't cross. It would be easier if I could give you something clean. A ribbon tied around a moral. Don't go after dark. Don't mock old stories. Don't look into water that looks back. I can't even tell you that the thing we saw wanted to hurt us because it didn't feel like that. It felt like a hand reaching and not caring what it grabbed, the way a drowning person pulls. It felt like a habit that has outlived its reason. It felt like attention more than hunger. Maybe that's worse. Hunger you can satisfy. Attention wants you to keep looking until you forget how to stop. I still get messages from people who knew Mason only a little. He was so funny, they say. He never seemed like the type to run off. His sister sends me pictures of him I haven't seen before, and one he's standing on the boardwalk at the bend, arms out, grinning like he owns the place, like it's a stage he built himself. I keep that one on my fridge with a magnet shaped like a blueberry. Sometimes in the morning when I'm half awake and the kettle clicks, I catch the edge of the photo in the corner of my eye, and my stomach drops the same way it did when the face rose on the cove. As if a surface I thought I knew is about to show me something under it. Claire doesn't talk about that night. When she calls me, it's about work or our mother's roof or the price of gas. But once, walking out of the grocery store, we saw a woman in a long coat by the cart return. Not Martha, but the same stance, the same way of holding still. Claire froze. Then she laughed at herself and shook it off. On the drive home, she said, "There's a word for when you keep seeing the same person everywhere." I asked what it was. She tapped the wheel. "I don't know. That's the point." We passed the sign for French Fort Cove, and both of us looked straight ahead like we were posing for a picture we didn't want to be in. I have not been back on the water. I walk by the river sometimes, late when I can't stand my own living room. The bridge lights make ladders on the current, and I climb them with my eyes like a child counting. On those nights, the wind smells like pennies if you tell yourself it does, and like maple if you don't. A couple of times, I thought I heard the tapping again, faint and far, like someone practicing scales on a table. It's probably nothing. It's also probably not nothing. I keep my hands in my pockets and I do not lean over the railing no matter what I think I see. People ask about the story sometimes. They want the one about the nun and the blood and the head rolling where it shouldn't. It fits their mouth better than the one I have. I say the old words and they nod and shiver and move on with their day. That story satisfies something. Mine doesn't. Mine just sits here the way night sits on water. It doesn't want you to be scared. It wants you to look. And when you do, it wants you to keep looking. I'm telling you this not because I'm brave or generous or because I think posting on the internet will solve anything. I'm telling you because I can feel that pull even now, like a belt around the middle, gentle as a guide and firm as a claim. And I am trying to loosen it by putting the attention somewhere else. Tonight I will make tea I won't drink, and I will check the bathroom mirror twice. I will not answer anything that sounds like it is waiting for an answer. I will watch the lamp throw its horizon line on the wall, and I will pretend I'm on the safe side of it. And if the tapping starts up again, soft and patient and counting off seconds, I will stand very still and forget the words to every prayer I don't know. If you live near the cove and you walk there after the lights come on, you might feel it too. The urge to lean in. The thought that you are owed a glimpse because you grew up with the story. If you do, go home. Don't bring friends. Don't bring jokes. Don't bring anything you're not ready to lose. If something asks for your attention in a language you almost understand, let it keep talking to the water. Let it keep looking for whatever it was told it lost. And if it looks up anyway, if it turns and the air smells like metal and wax and a phrase you almost know curls in your mouth, then think of the people you love in the plainest possible way. Picture dented car doors and blueberry magnets and the way a friend's laugh hiccups at the end. Tell it as gently as you can that they are not its. Then go home and keep the light on because the light doesn't save you, but it gives you something to look at besides the dark. And when you wake around 3 and the kettle clicks in the kitchen although you don't remember setting it, and the photo on your fridge has shifted a fraction to the left, and the sink holds a smear of something that smells like old copper. Even though you haven't cooked, you can tell yourself it was nothing. You can say you dreamed it. You can say that attention is a habit and habits can be broken. Say it out loud if you have to. Say it without waiting for an answer. I've gone back and forth about posting this because it sounds like one of those click-chasing travel horror stories, but I need to put it somewhere that isn't just inside my head at 3 in the morning. If you want to believe I made it up, I won't argue with you. I'm writing it because pretending it didn't happen hasn't helped me sleep. And because the thing that followed me home is patient in a way the desert trained it to be. I work behind the scenes on a small podcast about abandoned places. I'm the one hauling the recorder bag, replacing batteries, tagging audio, doing the noise reduction. Our host is my friend Camilla, who has this calm voice that makes old places feel less lonely. We don't do anything sensational. No exorcisms. No jump scares. The show is quiet, almost slow, like walking with your hands in your pockets while someone tells you who used to live here. In late May, we got a message from a listener in Tarapacá who said if we were ever in northern Chile, we should go to La Noria. He warned us not to stay after sunset. He didn't elaborate. People say things like that a lot. It doesn't land until it does. We flew into Iquique on a bright, watery afternoon. The ocean looked like hammered metal under the plane wing. I remember the heat coming down sideways even though the air was cool. Desert light works like that. It's colder than it looks and the shadows have edges. Our fixer, Diego, waited with a white pickup that had red dust baked into every seam. He smelled faintly like cigarettes and hand soap. He'd lined up interviews with a retired miner named Don Ramon, and with a local teacher who took her students on history trips to Humberstone and La Noria a couple of times a year. Traffic out of the city thinned to almost nothing. We passed trucks loaded with white sacks and every so often, a shrine by the roadside with plastic flowers sun-faded to a uniform pink. Camilla sat up front with Diego and did what she does, drawing out his memories without making it feel like an interview. He said his grandmother wouldn't speak the name La Noria at night. It wasn't that old, he told us. But in the desert, 50 years can look like 500. The saltpeter ruins had a way of keeping the outline of things after the people went away. Es como si el viento se acordara, I said. It's as if the wind remembers. I checked my recorder battery out of habit and slid a fresh pack into the pouch. The car radio tried to find stations, hissed and gave up. Every bump in the road set the equipment bag humming against the floorboard. A dull little vibration in my bones. We stopped in Pozo Almonte for empanadas and instant coffee. A woman in the store asked where we were headed and made this small face when we told her. She said something about tourists who took bones. I laughed because it sounded like an urban legend, like stealing from a graveyard and taking a curse to your hotel room. She didn't laugh back. The desert around the town was flat as a tabletop, the color of old paper. A dog crossed the road without looking up. We drove on. Humberstone came first, looking theatrical in the way preserved ghost towns do when they've been stabilized for school tours and festivals. Its big wooden theater had a bright facade like a stern face. Children's chalk drawings decorated the concrete near the classrooms. It was quiet except for our feet on the boards and a dry squeak from a loose door somewhere. Camila spoke softly into her mic about nitrate and strikes and the way water tastes like metal if it sits long enough in an open tank. A stray dog followed us between buildings and lay down when we stopped, like a volunteer guide who works for snacks. My levels rode between -12 and -6. It was an easy place to record. Everyone in the desert knows how to speak softly. We met Don Ramon on a bench beside a faded sign with historical bullet points in Spanish and English. He wore a brown sweater and a hat with a thin brim that had seen 1,000 suns. His eyes were the clear kind that make you feel like you're on thin ice. He shook Camilla's hand, nodded at me, and looked at Diego like men do when they've known each other since one of them was small. When Camilla asked about La Noria, he took a while to answer. He said it like you say the name of a relative who embarrassed the family and then died. Cementerio abierto, he said. Open cemetery. The coffins had come up when the ground moved and the timber rotted. The desert preserves, but it also loosens. He said the wind there sounded like a rope pulled through a ring. We had planned to record the cemetery at dusk for atmosphere. It's a trick we use sometimes. Humans lean forward when there's less light. Diego didn't like the idea and he didn't bother to hide it. Entramos de dia, he said, and then he muttered something about not being heroes. Camilla listened, then glanced back at me. I shrugged. We compromised in a way that felt like winning at the time. We would park outside the cemetery walls before sunset, set a pair of mics on stands inside for what's called a mid-side capture, let them run for 30 minutes while we sat in the truck, and then retrieve them before dark. It meant we wouldn't get the recorded sensation of walking among the graves at night, but we'd get the sound of the place without being in it. That felt like respect. It felt like caution. It wasn't enough. The La Noria cemetery does not sit behind a polite fence. It unrolls like a thought that someone tried to stop and couldn't. The ground is a cracked crust and the wood of the graves is gray and thin as wafers. The first thing I noticed was a child's shoe sitting upright by a plank. It looked new compared to everything else, as if a bus had just passed and a family had stopped for a picture, and the smallest had walked away lighter by one shoe. The second thing I noticed was how the wind changed tone between the graves, like sound moving through a set of flutes. I unzipped the bag and set up 2 stands. The capsules are small and black. They don't look like much. I wrapped foam windscreens around them, then added dead cats, the shaggy covers that keep air from chewing your audio to pieces. I checked the levels with headphones. There is always a moment when the headphones become the place you're standing. I eased one ear cup off and listened to what the air wanted to tell me. Camila didn't step inside the low broken wall. She crouched by it and watched me. Diego stayed by the truck, his hand on the open door.
He stood in a way that let me know we were on his time now, not the other way around.
He wasn't making a show of it, but he had already calculated the minutes we were allowed to be here. The sun was flat and hard on the western horizon. I rolled on both channels. A small fly clicked past the mic in a way that will always sound too close no matter how many times you hear it in post. I set the recorder at the base of a leaning cross and ran the cable beneath a plank so no one would trip. It was clumsy work because my fingers weren't warm anymore. We sat in the truck with the doors cracked for air and the ignition off. Camilla took notes in a small notebook in case the audio bucketed. Diego watched the road and the rearview mirror like both could change. I let the headphones hang around my neck, not listening to the feed because I wanted to save my ears. The wind came and went, and once a dry bush skittered somewhere outside and made all 3 of us look up. The light did that thing where it turns every surface sharp. A person could cut themselves on a shadow out there. 10 minutes in, something very faint moved under the general breath of the wind. It was subtle enough that I thought it belonged to my body, like a blood pulse in a microphone. I put my headphones on and eased up the gain. Camilla looked at me and I held up a finger because I was trying to decide whether I was listening to signal or a trick. The sound was layered. Wind, gravel ticking, a small rusty squeak I could explain, and then a tone like a human voice far away in a stairwell. I know what a false positive is. If you want to hear something, your brain will fetch it for you like a dog that doesn't get tired. I closed my eyes and switched the monitoring to solo one mic, then the other. The tone was stronger on the capsule closer to the ground. I switched on the low-cut filter that eats up rumble. It was still there, thin but sure. It went high and then came down like someone was turning their head while making the sound. It wasn't a word exactly. It was the shape of a word. I took one ear cup off and listened to the actual air. Nothing. The headphones held the desert a half-inch from me and made it an aquarium. The tone returned and then was joined by a second that was not exactly harmony. It was more like a child learning to sing by aiming at what another kid is doing and landing beside it. Camilla put her hand on my wrist. I gave her the headphones. Her mouth moved, asking without sound. I turned the small knob of hair to the right and pointed toward the mics. She listened. Her eyes changed in a way I've only seen a couple of times and always in quiet places. She looked at Diego and then at the sun and then at me. She put the headphones down gently in my lap. Diego said our names and didn't try to hide the tremble. He told me to bring them in. I didn't want to leave the gear out in that sound, which is a ridiculous thought when I write it down. I was thinking like a person who cares about microphones and windshields and XLR cables. I was not thinking like a person who has to live with a sound afterward. I got out and walked back to the wall. The air smelled like salt and old wood. My feet made tiny percussive ticks on the crust. I stepped over the low, broken bricks and felt something in the ground give a little under my weight. Not a sink exactly, a different register of firmness, as if the earth had breath. The tones increased. They weren't words, but they had cadence and a rise at the ends like questions. I felt cold across my shoulder blades, the particular cold of not being alone. I went to the first mic and switched it off. The sound stayed. The second mic gave me trouble because the cable caught on a nail. I had to lean my weight into the plank and twist the connector. While I bent, I heard a new thing. A tiny scratch, not like an animal, but like a fingernail drumming on wood from beneath the dirt. A measured tap-tap and then a whisper of drag. I didn't look down. I kept my eyes on the horizon. "Vamos," said Diego from the truck. He said it the way you call someone back from a place where the ground is soft. I finished, pulled the cable free, and didn't coil it. I walked back with the stands under my arm like awkward flags. I felt the urge to apologize to something behind me for leaving so quickly. In the truck, we moved with a choreography that I now realize was part fear, part politeness. We packed with the kind of neatness you use when you want to show you haven't taken or disturbed anything. Camilla kept looking over her shoulder as if someone would raise a hand, needing help getting up. The wind died on a dime, like someone had shut a door. The sudden absence revealed a thin sound as clear as a whistle. It came from under the ground and had the color of voices in tiled bathrooms. The truck's cab amplified and contained it. Camilla's hands were on her knees, white at the knuckles. Diego turned the key. The engine caught and the sound stepped back without disappearing. He put the truck into gear, then stopped himself from flooring it. He made us leave like we were leaving an old house, not a bad one, just one that didn't agree that we were real. We drove in that careful way until the cemetery was a small gray cluster in a flat land of nothing. The sound left the air. I swallowed and felt my ears pop. No one talked until we hit the main road and the truck rose from a rut and settled again with the bounce that tells you you're between places. Camilla laughed once, too loud, and then shook her head. "It's air and pipes," she said, like she had to plant the sentence in the cab. "It's wind in the frames." Diego said nothing. I nodded because I wanted it to be true. "Maybe resonance," I said, and I listed the variables I would write down later. Even as I said it, the part of me that stacks facts like bricks knew the sound had followed rhythm. I have never heard rhythm in wind. Back in Iquique, we rented a room 2 streets off the water, the kind of place with tile floors and a window that wouldn't quite latch. The receptionist had a TV on behind the desk playing a telenovela, at a volume that felt like company more than entertainment. We ordered dinner to the room because we didn't want to go anywhere bright. I washed the dust off my hands until the water ran clear and watched it go down like gray tea. I almost didn't connect the recorder because I wanted a few blank hours, but routine is a rope you hold when the ground feels like it might open. I plugged it into the laptop and started a transfer. The drive light ticked its small red metronome. Audio looks like teeth when you zoom out. It becomes neighborhoods when you zoom in. I scanned the waveform from the cemetery recording and felt that odd lift you get when a good mic inside a strange space does exactly what you hoped it would do. There was wind, yes, but the dead cats had done their job. There was wood talking to itself and grit skittering like insects tapping. I put on my headphones and pressed play on the section when the wind fell. Camilla sat on the end of the bed with a towel around her shoulders, answering her sister's texts. Diego smoked on the tiny balcony and tried to pretend he wasn't listening through the open door. The tone came in like it had in the truck, thin and a little shy. It slid up and paused, then down. It paused again as if waiting to see if the room would answer. And then a second tone arrived, smaller, like it had climbed stairs to reach the first. 2 breaths filled in around them. I stopped the playback. We all heard the absence. Camilla put her phone down and came to the laptop. "Play it," she said, and when I hesitated, she said it again. I pressed space. The tones returned, and then they did something that made my hands cold. They became less like tones and more like the skin of words. Not Spanish, not English, just the shape of a question under a question. It reached a peak that had the exact pitch of a child calling a name down a hallway, and then dropped like a stone. I took the headphones off and Set them gently on the desk because I have always believed in not throwing things when sound scares me. Diego came in from the balcony and shut the door like he was making sure the ocean stayed out. He didn't sit. He said he would take us back to the airport in the morning and that if we posted the episode it should be boring. Más historia, he said. More history. He wouldn't say superstition. Camilla asked if anyone in his family had ever said they heard anything there. He shrugged in a way that meant yes, and also don't ask me to draw the shape of it in the air. We went to sleep with the TV on low because some sounds are better than none. Around 2, I woke to a small tick in the corner of the room. It was the air conditioner casing shifting as the temperature changed. I told myself that and almost believed it. Then I heard it again from the floor near the window, a tiny tap like a fingernail on wood. I sat up. The city outside was quiet in that particular middle-of-the-night way that feels like everyone has paused their lives in the same second. I heard the tap again and then a drag. I swung my feet to the tile and stood, the way you stand in someone else's room to keep from believing you're in your own. I placed my palm flat on the floor. It was cool. I didn't feel vibration. The taps came again, a patient pattern that could have been code or could have been nothing. I did not wake Camilla. I did not turn on the light. I stood there until the pattern stopped. Then I went back to bed and lay with my eyes open, counting in sets of 4 like I was training a wild thing to match my breathing. We flew out the next day. The checkpoint guard asked where we had been, smiled at our dusty shoes, and waved us through. At the airport, we saw a group of school kids in matching jackets eating chips and craning to watch a soccer replay on a TV hung high over the gate. Their voices blurred into a warm band of sound that made my shoulders drop for the first time in 2 days. On the plane, Camilla slept with a jacket over her face. I looked at the long strip of desert beneath the wing and felt guilty for cutting it into a neat story, which is what we do for a living even when we try not to. Back home, thousands of miles from the Atacama, I cut the episode safe. We leaned hard into Don Ramon's recollections about labor and community, and the fragile plumbing of towns that spring up for one thing and are left behind when atoms rearrange for profit elsewhere. I kept 30 seconds of wind at the cemetery and a transition and 1 creak of timber and a few ticks of grit because they were specific and respectful. I left the tones out. I told myself it was because I didn't want to feed a ghost story. The truth is, I didn't want to share custody. The first night back, I slept like the falling kind of sleep, the kind you get when your body is grateful for a soft square of darkness. The second night, I woke at 3:21 a.m. I know because I turned my phone over to check. The room had that middle-of-the-night stillness that isn't silence so much as a held breath. My apartment is old enough to make winter noises and summer creaks and pipes that sing when the neighbor showers. This was none of those. It started as a faint tap from the wall by the radiator, then shifted to the floor near the foot of the bed, and then came from directly beneath where I lay. Not loud, not demanding, patient. I lay there and listened to what my home had learned to say while I was gone. The sound had the timbre of nail on wood, a tiny percussion played by someone with small hands. I moved my foot an inch and the sound paused as if to see if I would do it again. I did, it answered. Tap, pause, tap, tap. It repeated the shape of the exchange I had heard in the desert, the way one tone had followed another, not copying, but trying to meet it. I got out of bed and sat on the floor, my back to the dresser. I pressed my ear to the wood because logic is a ladder you keep climbing, even when the ceiling is 6 inches away. It was quiet at that close range. The sound exists at a distance, which makes sense if you think about how we hear the people above and below us in old buildings. I went to the kitchen and turned on the faucet. I filled a glass and took a sip because water makes actions feel normal. I considered doing what my grandfather used to do when the house settled and got weird, tapping back with a knuckle in a pattern for tough luck and go away and do you not know what time it is. I didn't. I stood in the doorway and watched my own doorway, which is an absurd sentence until you try it at 4 a.m. At work the next day, I was a person who slept fine and edited politely. Camilla sent me a link to a thread where someone posted photographs of Lenoria's graves and argued about whether kids yelling under the ground was a real thing or a translation of fear. I didn't open it. That evening, my downstairs neighbor, Mrs. Chen, stopped me in the stairwell and asked if I had heard scratching last night. She said it half embarrassed, like she knew she had stepped into someone's private weather. I told her old pipes do that. She said no from the floor, and then she smiled and said, "Never mind." Her granddaughter waved at me from behind her leg and showed me a sticker with a bluebird on it. She placed the sticker on my wrist without asking. It stayed there the rest of the night until I peeled it off and pressed it to the corner of my laptop, like a charm. I have done all the rational things. I checked for mice. I bought traps I didn't want to use and then couldn't set, because the idea of catching something alive and panicked is worse than not knowing. I lifted the rug and looked at the seams. I recorded the room at night with a handheld left on my desk, hoping to hear the fridge compressor or the building's heartbeat and nothing else. When I listen back, I get 30 minutes of nothing, then the soft brush of air through the small gap under the door, and then a series of taps that assemble themselves into an invitation if you decide that's what they are. I have never said yes out loud. I don't know if that matters. 2 weeks ago, the sounds changed. They started earlier, just after midnight, and with a pattern that had less space between the taps, as if whoever was on the other side of the wood had learned my habits and wanted to catch me while I was still half awake. I lay there and felt the slow, careful pressure build in the world beneath the floor, a pressure like dampness from a place that is never supposed to be wet. There is no damp in my building. The super says so. The taps moved from the foot of the bed to the middle of the room, then to the wall by the window, then back again, like someone tracing the outline of the space with a finger. Last night I tried something I'm not proud of. I put my phone on record and placed it face down on the floor, then slid under the covers and pretended to sleep. The taps came like a polite guest waiting for a host to finish their performance. They arranged themselves in patterns similar to the desert tones and then left gaps as if they were asking. My chest hurt. I reached down and touched the edge of the phone on the floor, half to make sure it was there and half because touching something solid seemed important. As my fingers brushed the case, something tapped under the exact place where my fingertip had been a second earlier. Not hard, not malicious. A small hello. I stopped the recording with my thumb without looking at the screen. This morning I listened to the file on the train. Subway speakers played an announcement that the next stop was delayed for signal problems. In my headphones, the taps were clearer than they had any right to be. And there, near the middle, was something new. A breath. A small intake, like air going into lungs that haven't done it in a long time. The hiss had the note of chalky dryness that is the desert's only perfume. I watched the blurred tunnel, and for a second my ears expected wind pushing through frames of wood, and a question rising under another question. If I'm honest, I don't think this will stop because I ask nicely. I don't think it wants anything I know how to give. Sometimes I picture the open coffins and the slim planks in that cemetery, and understand how sound could find paths through what we call ground. Sometimes I think about the man who wrote to us, the one who told us not to stay after dark, and I wonder if he moved and changed his life like you do after a near miss, only to find some part of it took his forwarding address. Sometimes I think about the shoe by the plank and the way it sat waiting. It is quiet now as I type, but that's because the day is loud. The street below my window is full of small arguments and shared jokes and the regular patience of delivery drivers. The radiator ticks like it always has. The sun is on the far building and throws back a square of light that moves across my wall like a slow animal. It will be dark later, and at some point I will wake to the particular stillness that is not absence. And I will hear a tap from under the bed, then from the wall by the window, then from the midpoint of the floor. It will wait to see if I am listening. I will be. I have learned how. I used to think fear was what thundered in you when something ran straight at your life. I think now that fear is the small patient sound that waits under the floor and asks once, then again. It is not a scream. Screams are a kind of mercy, they end. What keeps going is a tiny nail on wood and a breath that has crossed a desert to find you. If you don't believe me, that's fine. I am not asking you to. I am telling you that at 3:21 a.m., when the wind has nothing to do and every city makes itself into a cemetery of rooms where people pretend to sleep, the sound from under my floor changes from knocking to something like a careful scratch, as if someone is tracing the outline of where I am with one persistent finger. And when I hold my breath and count to 4, the tapping keeps time, like a child who knows you're home. I never meant to post this online, but I'm tired of hearing the same sound and pretending it's nothing. I don't want advice. I don't need theories. I just need to put this somewhere that isn't inside my head. If you live in Austin, you've probably heard stories about the old city cemetery, the one with the sunken markers and the chained-off corners, where the oaks lean like they're tired of holding their own shadows. People say a bell rings there at midnight. I used to laugh at that because what bell? There's no tower. The cemetery is hemmed in by busy streets and dull apartment buildings, and at night you mostly hear mufflers, cicadas, and the hiss of I-35. I work sound at a little theater on Red River. Recording is second nature to me. I trust microphones more than memory. That's how this started. Not with belief, but with a recorder and a plan to prove a point to my friend. Her name is Maya. We went to high school together and stayed friends through the slow orbit of our 20s. She runs a small local podcast, History, Urban Myths, interviews with old-timers who remember the city before the cranes and condos. When she pitched an episode on the cemetery bell, I told her I'd help for free. "We'll go at midnight," I said. "I'll set up 2 mics, do a clean capture, and when we play it back, you'll hear what it really is. Traffic, a train, pipes from the houses." She was thrilled. That's Maya for you. Enthusiastic to a fault, kind of the engine of every group she's in. My younger brother Ben heard us talking and asked to come too because he'd never been inside after dark, and he loves anything that feels like a dare. Ben's a mechanic on South Lamar. He tinkers when he's nervous, always has something to fix with his hands. We went on a Wednesday in late September. The heat had finally broken, and the evening air had that dry, papery smell of leaves. I brought 2 small condenser mics, a handheld recorder, a clamp, windscreens, spare batteries, and a thermos of coffee. Maya had a notebook and those cheap clip-on lights you get at a bookstore. Ben had a flashlight the size of a baton. We parked by the old iron gate. It tilted a little on its hinges, and you could see where someone had repainted it but missed the bottom rung. A posted sign warned about closing hours. Another warned about rattlesnakes. The caretaker's house across the street was dark, one porch bulb haloed with gnats. The road was still busy. People were out getting tacos or heading home to their dogs, and it felt faintly ridiculous to be tiptoeing toward a cemetery like kids. Ben handled the gate while Maya and I ducked through. The grass was uneven and soft where the ground had settled around graves. Names were worn down to letters, an M here and R there. I could make out one date, 1873, on a tilted marble piece that had sunk into a puddle of shadow. I told myself to notice things the way I do before a show, doing a mental sound check of the space, the muffled thrum of highway tires, a train far off, night insects cycling in the shrubs, a dog barking 2 blocks away in a repetitive pattern that hinted at a yard it didn't like. That's what the bell was, I told myself. Some layered thing we interpret as a tone. Where should we set up? Maya whispered, like the dead might get offended. "Over by those iron posts," I said. "Less highway bleed if the oaks block it." There were 4 posts in a square near the center, waist-high with rusted eyelets. They didn't match the fence line. Ben ran his light over one and whistled. "Looks old." We later learned those posts marked a lot where safety coffins were installed in the late 1800s. Back then, yellow fever scared the breath out of half the city, and people were paranoid about being buried alive. They installed coffins with pipes and bells so the prematurely buried could signal. You pulled the rope. The bell rang above ground, and in theory someone came to dig you up. The ropes rot, though. Everything does. I didn't know that history in the moment. I just liked that the posts felt like anchor points for my mic stand. I clamped the first mic to the closest post, set the other on a small tripod at knee level, and checked the levels. The recorder's screen glowed pale green. Ben drifted off to read names with his flashlight, while Maya paced and rehearsed her intro under her breath. I stared at my watch. 11:53 p.m. A breeze moved across the lot in a careful sheet and lifted the hair on my arms. "That thing about the bell," Maya said, sidling up. "You think it's totally fake?" "I think stories fill gaps," I said. "If your head wants a bell, it'll find one. What if the head doesn't want it? Then it'll find wind and be happy." She laughed. "We've got 7 minutes to find out. There's a particular hush that comes right before midnight in a city like Austin. Bars are humming, streets are pulsing, but if you step into a pocket like that cemetery, there's a balanced second where everything pauses between cycles. The train is gone, a dog is quiet, the wind drops for a breath. Your ears reach for anything to anchor to." I hit record. The green line started moving. We didn't bother with interviews or walking around for texture. We stood still and let the space imprint itself. I could hear my own breath in through my nose, out slow. Ben clicked off his flashlight and let the darkness take his face. When the clock on my phone rolled to 12:00, The sound came from the far end of the lot. It was so thin at first I thought it was a truck's gear shift whining in a weird resonance. Then it gathered itself into a tone. One strike. Not a chime, not a church bell, not a triangle. Something smaller, sadder. A metal mouth tapped with a careful hand. It carried in the air smoother than any highway noise. It hung for a beat past where it should have died. Maya grabbed my arm. "Oh my God." "Hold still," I said, which came out like please because the hair on my arms had climbed higher. The tone faded. The insects started to pick up again. Ben whispered, That was a bell, right?" 2 more strikes came evenly spaced. Tung, tung. The second had a wobble, a tremor, the way an old spoon vibrates against a jar. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. There was no tower, no visible source, no trick. I looked toward the road without moving my feet. No truck slowed. No cyclist stopped. The caretaker's porch bulb hummed indifferent. Maya had tears in her eyes. I didn't, but only because I was concentrating on the recorder like I could hold my breath through the mic and keep everything crisp. 4 more strikes, 6 total. I counted without meaning to. On the 6th, there was a little hitch in the air. Not a sound so much as a space where a sound should have gone, and then a delicate catch-up like something mechanical had to be coaxed. That small lag did something terrible to me. It made the bell human. It made it tired. Behind us, in the dark, there was the smallest drag over grass. A shoe maybe, or fabric. Ben pivoted hard with the flashlight. The beam cut through dust and found nothing new, just stones, low fences, the lip of an opened earth where a sink had started and then been filled with sand. The bell struck once more and stopped. The insects rushed back in like water when a boat glides away from a dock. "That's enough," I said, and stopped the recording because my hands had started to shake. We stood there another minute because leaving too fast felt like the wrong way to end whatever we had just shared. Then we packed up. I unclamped the mic. The iron post felt cool. I guess I expected a vibration and was weirdly relieved that it was dead metal. We made it to the car without speaking. In the lot, under sodium light, we let ourselves exhale. "So," Maya said, half laughing, half breathless, "do we have it?" "Tell me we have it." "We have something," I said. In the glow of the dash, the recorder's tiny screen looked like a river of lines. I didn't want to play it there. I wanted to be inside, with walls and coffee and the option to say no thank you to a ghost, if it decided to come for our faces through the speakers. We went back to my apartment off East 12th. My upstairs neighbor, a nurse, was coming in as we arrived. She nodded and told us to have a good night. And I remember that detail only because the normalcy of it pressed everything weird back down into something you could sit on. The apartment smelled like old coffee. I set the recorder on the kitchen table and wired it to my laptop. Ben made a pot because he always does. Maya sent a text to a coworker that just said, "I think we caught it." When I dragged the waveform into the editing software, there it was. 6 clean peaks, evenly spaced with that odd little hitch between the 5th and 6th. The night around it was smooth. A car here, a click there. You know the silver confidence you get when a thing behaves the way it's supposed to? It's calming. It's proof the world is mostly machine. "Play it," Maya said and squeezed my wrist. I did. The bell came through the speakers, smaller than it had felt in the graveyard, but still steady. And then something else came with the last strike. It wasn't part of the bell. It rode after it, not even a full second later. A whisper that didn't push air around it so much as fold itself into the tail like a crease. 2 syllables. Too late. We all heard it. The words were not a trick of my brain putting letters over a rasp. They were distinct. The way the T clipped, the L softened, like lips close to the end of a pipe. Ben stepped back from the table with his mug and looked at the ceiling like he could rewrite the room. "Nope." Maya had her hand over her mouth. She laughed the way people laugh when a relief valve pops open. Then she started crying again, and I didn't even think it was fear at first. She cries at movies, at kind things, and maybe too late is a kind of kindness if it's about one specific past moment and not about your life as a whole. I replayed it. On the 3rd pass, my neighbor upstairs flushed her toilet. The pipes rattled. That sound echoed down into the apartment and made the whisper fill the corners. "Okay," I said, and closed the laptop like a lid. Okay. No one wanted to sleep. We stayed up until 3:30 talking in circles, theories, jokes that didn't land. Ben suggested it was a prank, someone with a Bluetooth speaker. I said, why would a stranger time that? Why wouldn't they do a clean boo and jump out? Maya pulled up articles about the 1870s and safety coffins, and how families used to hire night watchmen to listen for bells. She read a paragraph about ropes rotting and the bells ringing long after the ropes were gone. The phrasing bothered me. Long after the ropes were gone. By what mechanism? Wind, settling earth, rats? Or was that just story hydraulics again, the way people grease a legend so it slides easier into a new ear? At 4:10, Ben yawned and said he'd go. Maya said she'd Uber home so she could think on the ride. I said I'd send a copy of the file in the morning. The apartment felt different after they left. Larger, emptier, more angles. I washed mugs I didn't need to wash. My phone vibrated. A push notification from a weather app told me there was a heat advisory tomorrow, and it felt like being scolded by a bland god. I took the recorder into the bedroom because part of me didn't want it out on the table, like a mouth that could open without being asked. That's the first night the bell followed me. Not ringing, not audibly, but it tucked itself into the gaps between other sounds. The AC clicked on, too late. The fridge compressor started, too late. I told myself I was tired and listening for something that wasn't there. But when my alarm went off at 7, I had dreamed of a hand knocking from under a floor and woke choking on a dry breath like the room had vacuumed itself. The next day at the theater, I snapped at a coworker for wheeling a set piece too fast. Our boss, Nicole, took me aside. She's calm in a way that makes everyone else vapor lock a little around her. "Go home if you're sick," she said, not unkindly. "You look like you swallowed chalk." I told her I was fine. By evening, the old routines had smoothed me out. I convinced myself the whisper had been picked up from one of us, a shape of words in the wind. That night after the last show, I went by Maya's to bring her a flash drive of the file. She rents the back unit of a duplex in Hyde Park. The front tenant, an older woman named Mrs. Kemp, waters her plants at strange hours and tells you about her cats like they're people with local political opinions. She waved at me while midnight crept. I felt stupid again, standing in an ordinary place with an extraordinary story in my pocket. Maya had a whiteboard covered in names and dates. She was doing her homework for the episode. "Look at this," she said, and pointed to a list. There was a guy, first name Thomas, last name I can't read from the paper. Died in 1873. And a caretaker's journal from the time mentions the 5th bell rung in this week. Not like a normal church bell. The way he phrased it, rung, sounds like the safety ones. She looked at me. "Do you think the too late could be for him? Like someone missed it?" "Someone always misses something," I said, more sharply than I meant. On her table was a printed map of the cemetery, and someone had drawn a neat X where we set up. 4 iron posts. I ran my finger over them without touching the paper. "Can we go back tonight?" she said, "just to see. I'll bring flowers. Not as a joke. As, I don't know, an offering. To say we heard you." "I have a load in early," I said. "Maybe tomorrow." I told myself that was reasonable. What I didn't say was that my mouth had gone dry when she said go back, like I'd swallowed a fist. When I drove home, the bell came with me in a new way. At a stoplight, a cyclist's chain clattered and it hit a note that didn't sound like chain at all. Too late, my brain supplied, and I wanted to roll the window down and shout at nothing. When I parked, a patrol car idled at the end of the block. The cop inside, a woman I'd seen around the neighborhood, dipped her head in a polite acknowledgement. Her tag said Ruiz. She was the sort of officer who makes you feel like you might be okay in a bad situation. I almost flagged her down to ask a nonsense question. "What time do you get off?" "Have you ever heard a weird noise at the cemetery?" But I didn't. I went inside and sat in the dark, and waited for midnight because pretending I wasn't waiting would have been the bigger lie. At 11:59, my phone vibrated. No call, no text, just that physical buzz twice like a throat clearing. I turned it over. The screen was black. The second hand on my old wall clock hung for a tick and then jumped. Midnight. In the kitchen, something tapped the pipe under the sink. Cleanly, 6 times. It was so small I almost laughed. The sound of someone with a metal ring drumming their finger on the underside of the world. Then a whisper slid into the space the last tap left behind. Too late. I slept with the lamp on. In the morning, I called the number on the city website for the cemetery and left a message asking about historical tours. In the afternoon, a man called back. His name was Alvarez, and he sounded tired in the way public servants get when they've been doing their job a long time. "Tours," he said. "We don't really do that. Folks from the university come by. Families. You can walk in during daylight. Are you asking for a group? No, I said. I just wanted to know about the posts. The iron ones with loops. He knew immediately what I meant. Old safety plots, he said. Families with money could add a pipe and a bell. The bell would be on a post. They don't work anymore. They're removed or rusted. A lot of the ropes were hemp. Rot like anything else. Did the bells ever ring after? He was quiet for a second longer than he had to be. They're stories, he said finally. In every city with an old cemetery, you get a bell story. Look, sign says no entry after sunset. I'm not watching the gate after 5. People go in anyway. Some kids do dumb things. Don't be one of them. I won't, I said, and thanked him for his time. That night I broke the rule again. Not because I wanted to, not exactly. Because the quiet where the bell fit was worse than the bell itself. It felt like standing outside a door you know a person is behind and refusing to knock. Ben texted as I was lacing my shoes. Going back? He wrote. Yeah, I typed and then added, come if you want. He arrived with his flashlight and some of those little store-bought candles that come in glass. I don't know why the candles surprised me. Ben always hides a soft streak under tools and grease. We met Maya by the gate. She had a bouquet of grocery store carnations. We didn't say much. We walked in together. 3 people who agreed not to make fun of anything. The moon was thin. The city was loud, but the cemetery held itself apart. Like a cup catching a sound the rest of the block spilled. We set 1 candle on each iron post and wedged the glass so it wouldn't topple. The flames reached and steadied. Maya set the flowers at the base of the nearest post and knelt to whisper something I didn't try to hear. Ben stood with his hands in his jacket. I kept my recorder in my pocket. The whisper from the night before had taught me what I needed to know. Some things don't care if you record them. They'll find a way into your house. When midnight came, the bell sounded from closer than before. Not loud, not dramatic. Intimate. The 6 strikes came with the same little warble between 5 and 6. With the 4th, the small glass candle on the far post rattled like a fingernail had dragged the rim. With the 5th, the flame leaned hard and then righted. On the 6th, the wick guttered but did not go out. Then the whisper came. It wasn't just behind the last note now. It came from inside the pipe that ran down that post, up through the ground below us through some imagined channel that had once connected air to a coffin. Too late, it said, and then again like someone trying a key twice. Maya clutched my sleeve so tight she pinched skin, and I kept my eyes on the candle because I knew if I looked at the ground I'd put a face there, and then I'd never come back up. Ben did look. He leaned over the iron loop with his light, following the line of rust down into the dirt like he could make out the tube. He breathed through his mouth. He does that when he's trying not to be a person. We should go, he said finally, and for once I didn't argue. We blew out the candles and walked toward the gate. Halfway there was a shape by a headstone under a cedar elm. I saw a shoulder, a hat, a stance, and I thought caretaker. And then Alvarez stepped into the path with his hand raised in a show of body language that said, I see you. I don't want trouble. Up close, the man looked older than his voice. He had that set of shoulders men sometimes carry when they've spent too many years lifting things alone. I told you not to come after dark, he said. Not angry, tired. We're sorry, Maya said. We brought flowers to be respectful. Flowers are for families, he said, and daylight. He walked with us to the gate. No more of this, he said. People think the bell is a joke. They leave trash. They scare each other and then run and break stones that are older than their great-grandparents. He tilted his head and studied me. You recorded, didn't you? Yes, I said. It doesn't like that, he said, matter of fact. Not that it cares exactly. That's not the right way to say it. But sometimes when people take things out, it puts things back. What things? Ben said. But Alvarez had already opened the gate and stood aside. We left. There was nothing dramatic about the way the streetlight struck the hood of Ben's truck, or the way Maya's Uber pulled up with a polite blink. There was nothing cinematic about the way the night kept moving. The bell, I told myself, would stay in that cup of air where it belonged. It did not. Over the next week, it slipped into every place where time thins. In the minute after shows when the audience leaves and the stage is empty, except for the ghost of applause. In the moment the microwave quiets and the TV hasn't been turned on yet. In the pause of conversations when someone is about to say the thing they're not sure they should say, the bell took that pause and filled it. Sometimes the whisper came with it. Too late. And it wasn't always an accusation. That's what I need you to understand. Sometimes it sounded like a statement of weather. Like, here's the barometric pressure. Here's your life, too late. I went back to the cemetery alone once more, and I don't recommend you do that. It was a Monday, early in the month. I brought a little handheld like always and nothing else. I stood by the iron posts and didn't set up gear. I just held the recorder and said out loud, "I'm sorry for taking the sound." The wind lifted and fell. The bell struck once, though my watch said 11:48. It didn't wait for midnight. It struck again and again and again, 3, 4, 5 times. Like time had been stepped on and wrinkled, like the schedule had become a thing we had made up. On the 6th strike, something shifted under my shoes the way a small animal shifts inside a nest. The whisper came not after but during, too during the tone, late under it. When it faded, there was another sound I haven't mentioned yet, because it's small and I can't prove it. A breath. A human exhale through a narrow tube, the way you breathe when you're conserving air. I left without looking at the caretaker's house. I walked home down streets where the neighbors were grilling on tiny balconies and kids rode bikes too fast and shouted at each other about pizza. The city felt heavy with ordinary life. I felt like I had put a crack in my own apartment door and something thin as a thread had followed me up the stairs and was now tied to my ankle in a knot I couldn't find. The podcast episode never came out. Maya tried. She wrote it twice and scrapped it. The file, the clean capture with the 6 strikes and the whisper, corrupted a week later. Not all the way. The peaks are still there. The tail is gone. In its place is the faintest hiss. If you turn it up, the hiss becomes a breath. If you listen too hard, that breath becomes a pattern. And one night I plotted those patterns on a scrap of paper at my kitchen table like a lunatic. And it spelled nothing except the distances between things you can't reach. Ben won't come by after 10 anymore. When I asked why, he shrugged and said, "I get up early." But he checks his watch when he's here. And if it's 11:30, he starts doing that nervous hand thing with coins in his pocket, like he's reminding his fingers they exist. Officer Ruiz, the cop at the end of the block, stopped by a few nights ago because someone had called in a noise complaint on the building. She knocked, and when I opened the door, she looked past me at the kitchen where the lamp is always on now. And she listened. "You alone?" she asked. I said yes, and she nodded like that mattered. "People have been calling about a bell," she said. "Not like music. Just one note off and on late. The kind of thing you hear when you're trying to sleep." She gave me a look that wasn't skeptical exactly, more like careful. "You tell me if you hear it," she said, and wrote her name on the back of an old receipt. Sometimes people think they're hearing things. Sometimes they are. I said I would. I didn't. I don't know what I could say that wouldn't make her step into my apartment and tilt her head toward the sink and say, "Yes, I hear it too." And then where would we be? 2 people in the doorway of a small life, listening to a sound that doesn't belong to us. Last night, the nurse upstairs had her TV on a hospital drama, and the monitor beeps were soft and periodic, and the bell slid under them so easily I could barely tell the difference. It counted 6 and stopped. I sat in the dark and thought about the 5th bell in the caretaker's journal. The 5th bell rung in this week. Who came running? Who stood in the grass above a pipe and put their ear to it and said, "I hear you"? How long did it take to dig? The whisper isn't always too late, not exactly. Sometimes it's just the T in the shape of the L caught behind it. Like breath that doesn't have enough room to turn into a word. Sometimes I think it's saying my name, but that's me being vain, making the world about me when it's not. Sometimes I think it's telling me a time. Too late, 12, too late. I know what you'll want to ask, if you're the kind of person who reads to the end of stories like this. Did I open the pipe? Did I dig? Did I call the city and demand they unearth a coffin from 1873 and show me nothing is inside? No, I didn't. Because whatever this is, it isn't a puzzle you solve. It isn't a door you can kick. It's a schedule, and I stepped into it, and now it knows me. At midnight, when the world pauses and my apartment becomes a mouth for every old sound to find me through the walls, the bell rings. 6 times. The 5th catches. The 6th lands. And then the whisper folds itself into the last fading curl and tells me what it has always told me in the smallest voice I've ever heard. Too late. I keep the recorder on the nightstand with a new card in it, blank, ready. Sometimes I think I'll press record at the exact right second and catch something different. One more syllable, a different breath, the absence of it. But when the moment comes, I don't move. I lie still and listen like I'm on the other end of a rope, and someone above me has their ear to a pipe, and this is the only way our voices can ever meet. I tell myself that the bell is only a reminder, not a threat. I tell myself that it's not for me. I tell myself a lot of things. The room is very quiet right now. The second hand on the wall clock is about to hop. My phone, for reasons I can't explain, just buzzed twice though no one texted. If I hit send on this and turn off the light, there will be a small tap under my sink. A breath will thread what's left of the midnight through a metal mouth where no bell hangs. You can call it a story if that helps you sleep. I'm not posting this for belief. I'm posting it to make the sound live somewhere else for a minute. It's almost time. Listen.